Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Son? Don't worry, everything will be fine. How not to worry. Dad, Emily is due to have triplets. Can you imagine? Yeah. It's kind of hard to imagine, sure. But you know she has the best doctors, great clinic, good health too. What could possibly go wrong? Yeah, you're probably right. Well, if you're right, then stop running around the room like an eagle. Better do something useful to brighten the wait. This conversation was between Robert, a powerful businessman, and his son Jack, who worked on his father's farm. The family, of course, had quite enough money for the young man and his wife to purchase their own place. Come on. Live at my place, Robert said when his son struck up a conversation with him about moving. The house is huge. There's plenty of room for everyone, you and the kids, when it comes down to it. And Dad, Jack mumbled, it's kind of awkward. Well, am I really going to embarrass you? Or maybe Emily doesn't like me, that's not the point. I'm a grown man, a married man. I don't feel right living with my dad. It's not respectable, son, at your age to think about such trivialities. You can live here. I won't interfere with you. Strictly speaking, the house is so big that you and I can, living in it, never meet at all. Though I'd certainly prefer that you should remember me from time to time. It was then that Jack realized why Robert had been so insistent in suggesting that they move in with him. It was all about the usual loneliness, and you bet it was. After all, he had no one but his son. His wife had died when the boy was still a child, and his father had raised his only heir on his own. Of course, having realized this, Jack could not refuse his beloved father, especially since there were no objective reasons for refusal. The parents' house was indeed large and spacious, perhaps even too large for one not very young man. It was too big for three. But when he and Emily had children, it would be just right. All the more so because his wife could find a common language with Robert quite quickly and would hardly be against such a neighborhood. But in the beginning, Jack had been worried about whether she could get along with his father. It was, as was often the case, a matter of differing financial situations. Emily's family, of course, was not exactly poor. Quite ordinary average family of intellectuals. Her parents were university professors and she was a school teacher. But compared to Jack and his father, they could certainly be considered practically paupers. Nevertheless, Robert accepted his daughter-in-law quite calmly. So what? So she's not rich, he said to his son after meeting her. But you can see at once that the girl is a good, decent. You clearly loves you, and you her. What else do you need? We make enough money for everyone. And a couple years into their marriage, Emily got pregnant, and with triplets. At least that's what the many doctors who had seen her claimed. Of course, Jack was absolutely happy, but also worried about his wife. His worries increased even more when she went to the maternity hospital. Despite his father's reassurances, Jack kept pacing the room, waiting for the call from the clinic. He was to be notified as soon as Emily went into labor, and that moment had come. The new father's anxiety continued to mount. He needed something to occupy himself. Look, Robert said, you don't have anything. No stroller, no baby envelope. You didn't buy one beforehand, because it's bad luck, right? Jack slapped himself on the forehead. Well, there's something for you to do. I guess it's okay now, his father smiled. Jack decided he should take his advice. After all, Robert was much more experienced than he was, including in such matters. After all, he himself had once waited for his wife and son to come out of the hospital like this. So he should know what a future young father should do in such cases. And indeed, Jack's mood swiftly crept upward. Back in the car, it was difficult to concentrate on the road and at the same time worried that something could go wrong. That's why his subconscious mind chose what was more important at the moment, namely careful driving. At the store, there was no trace of the unpleasant feeling at all. How could anyone worry about anything? Such a calm, peaceful environment, where everything around reminded him of his children. Jack concentrated on his future daughters and the things he needed to buy for them. First of all, of course, the discharge envelopes. In fact, that's what he'd come for. But somehow he didn't notice that he had picked up a whole mountain of other very necessary things. Toys, some dresses, shoes, and other such trifles. The only thing that kept Jack from buying a stroller was the fact that it would hardly fit in his car right now. Wasted he heard behind him as he stood at the checkout counter. He turned around just in case. The words were hardly directed at him. To his amazement, however, Jack saw a woman standing right behind him, staring intently at him. She looked like a typical gypsy woman, long black hair, long skirt, and a variety of bracelets on her thin wrists. "Pardon me," he politely interjected. "It's bad luck to buy baby stuff in advance," she explained. "They should have waited until the babies were born." Jack shrugged and turned away from her. Perhaps half an hour ago he might have considered this ridiculous incident a bad omen, but now he was completely calm and content with his life. All his worries had faded into the background, overwhelmed by the weight of the arguments presented to him by his father and by his own mind. After all, really, what could go wrong? The clinic where Emily was having her baby was one of the best in the city. Plus, he'd personally given the midwife a considerable sum of money as a voluntary contribution, and of course, additional assurances that his wife would receive the best possible care. In addition, he promised the hospital authorities fresh renovations and new equipment if his wife's labor was successful. Was there anything to worry about? With such inputs, he'd never faced a problem in his entire life that couldn't be solved with money. And so, Jack thought he had nothing to worry about. But Emily was worried. She knew, of course, of all the preparations her husband had made, but she also realized that not all matters in this world are solved by money. Yet there was no reason to doubt the professionalism of doctors, as well as in their interest in the happy outcome of pregnancy. But not only from them all depended on this day, and her pregnancy was not too smooth. It was no joke to carry 3 babies at once, and even for the first time. What if she didn't fulfill her role? What if her body wasn't capable of such feats? These thoughts plagued her until she found herself in a private room at the hospital. Emily was glad she'd insisted on having the baby in a shared room instead of the private room Jack had suggested. "But come on, honey," she persuaded him. "How am I going to be alone all day and night?" He'd go crazy. Why alone, he wondered. There are doctors and nurses and other staff there. They have a lot of work to do without me. They'll come in once every few hours, and that's just to check up on me. What about normal human communication? Maybe there will be some women there who have already given birth, and they can give me some pointers. Okay, well, if you think that's best. There was doubt in Jack's voice, but still he decided to do as his wife asked. However, the very experienced women Emily had hoped for were not in the room. As it happened, there were only 2 of them, she and a very young Kate at least. She looked very young, maybe even younger than her real age. Slim, almost skinny. Not rich, but clean, neat clothes. In all the time they'd been lying together, no one had ever come to see her. Suddenly, Emily found in Kate an escape from all her anxieties. Of course, they began to socialize. And how else? When you lie alone in the ward, where there is no one else to talk to. Very soon, Emily realized that her problems were not so serious compared to what her newfound friend was going through. "So who's the father of your baby?" asked Emily one day. "Why doesn't he come?" "Too busy," Kate snorted. "So busy he doesn't have time to talk to the mother of his child. His class name is Sarah. If my memory serves me correctly, of course. Did he leave you, then? Did he know you were pregnant?" "How so?" "Of course he knew. Except that the money was more important to him than the baby. Sarah's the daughter of some rich daddy, and I've got nothing to take from him. He went to New York with her. I was still waiting for him like a fool from the army." Later, from the conversations of doctors, Emily learned that Kate, as well as her, will have a difficult labor. She's very young. And besides, no one followed her pregnancy, no ultrasound, no other tests, and accordingly some important, in her case, drugs and vitamins. As it turned out, they were put in the same room for the reason that both of them, in fact, due to different circumstances, were going to have a difficult labor. "Look, Kate, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you," Emily began gently one day. "I don't think you can do that," Kate smiled. I'm hardened. I keep wondering, how come you didn't even have a pregnancy checkup? I mean, you're obviously expecting your baby and you want it to do well, and that's why it's important to get checkups. Stuff like that. You should have known that." "I did know. It's just not enough," the girl exhaled. "I do want the best for my baby, don't I? And to give him that, I need money. Here I was working as a cleaner to get a decent amount. You have to work very hard. There was no time left at all to run to doctors and paid clinics, which sometimes work around the clock. I cannot afford." "And what?" "There was no one to help you at all," gasped Emily. "I understand the fiancé ran away, but the parents?" "What about parents? Mom died a long time ago. My stepfather drank himself to death. I don't feel sorry for him, though. I'm sorry, it's not nice to say that, but for as long as I can remember, all he did was drink." "Who's my real father?" "I never knew. My mom didn't want to tell me. I didn't really insist." "And your friends?" "I didn't really have any. At school, they only laughed at me for my shabby clothes and poor grades. It's not that I was stupid," Emily guessed. "You had to work." "Since 6th grade," Kate nodded sadly. "Don't you think? I'm not complaining. It's a rewarding experience anyway." "It's okay," Emily said patronizingly, putting a hand on her shoulder. You'll never be alone again. We'll have the baby now, and I'll talk to my husband and figure out something for you. Oh, I don't need handouts, the girl resented. It's not like I'm some low-down street beggar. It's not handouts, it's friendly help and concern for the child. And besides, it's not like I'm offering you money. My husband has connections. Why don't we get you a better job or help you get an education? The joy in Kate's voice was mixed with disbelief. She'd gotten used to the fact that everyone who promised her anything betrayed her in the end. She wasn't used to trusting people, but she still wanted so badly for it to be true, especially now that not only herself, but also the little man would be depending on her. Of course, Emily smiled. She felt sorry for the poor thing who had been through so much. And at the same time, she admired her. All the trouble sent by cruel fate had not broken Kate, but only made her stronger. Emily was not sure that in a similar situation could remain so cheerful and not lose heart, and so the time for labor came. Surprisingly, both of them started the process at about the same time, a few minutes apart. First, Emily realized she was due and pressed the call button for the doctor. She still had time to see her friend follow suit, and then her whole life became one of unrelenting pain. Doctors fussed around her, trying to make the process easier, but it was not an easy task. After all, Emily was to give birth to 3 beautiful daughters at once, and with this task she coped. Even if it took several long and very painful hours, when it was over, Emily could only whisper to the doctor to show her the babies. She froze with them in her arms and never regained consciousness again. Her body no longer had the strength to survive. It took all of them to bring the 3 little girls safely into the world. She was never to learn that her new friend's labor had ended much more quickly, but in some ways less successfully. Kate's son came into the world within an hour, except that he did not bring happiness to the young mother. The fact is that the boy never managed to make a single independent breath. In fact, he was born dead. For several hours, the young mother just sat and stared at the wall, not noticing anything and no one around her, and not reacting to anything and feeling nothing but the endless emptiness that seemed to have settled in her soul forever. She didn't see the commotion around her, and only perked up slightly when she heard the synchronized crying of Emily's daughters, and the commotion rose really terrible when the doctor stated the death of a woman in labor, and the room came running to the head of the department, and a little later, and the chief physician. Right on the spot they arranged a council, trying to decide what to do now. Both understood. The rich husband of the unfortunate patient will not forgive them for the death of his beloved wife, even though no fault of the doctor's in this, and was not. But no matter how much they consulted, they could not come up with anything good. Jack, meanwhile, was rushing happily to the hospital. He couldn't wait to share his purchases with his wife and to see his daughters, 3 of them at once. It's worth it. He was in the most joyful mood. He forgot about his own worries and the strange warning of the fortune teller at the cash register. All his thoughts were only about his wife, his children, and their long and happy future together. The joy so seized him that he did not particularly watch the speed limit, and several times carelessly violated it. However, he quickly came to his senses and reduced the speed to the speed limit. But on a slippery road, and with poor visibility due to the incessant heavy rain, any mistake could be fatal. Jack didn't realize it himself. Just at one moment he realized that the car was sliding in the wrong direction, and there was nothing he could do about it. Flying into the oncoming lane, Jack's car hit a concrete road barrier and practically collapsed. After the monstrous impact, the unconscious man himself was pinned in the cabin. Fortunately, the other road users were able to orient themselves, and there were no other casualties in this horrific accident. The traffic on this stretch of road was very busy, and some of the witnesses immediately called an ambulance, but it took too long for the doctors to get there in this weather, to get Jack out of the cabin, trying not to hurt him even more. Jack reached the hospital in a coma, literally hovering between life and death. Robert, meanwhile, began to realize that he, too, was gripped by a certain unpleasant excitement, which must have been passed on to him from his son. He saw no objective reason for it, but he had not heard from Jack or Emily for a very long time. Although childbirth is not a quick process, and not just one child, but 3. Nevertheless, the vague anxiety grew stronger and stronger. Robert didn't notice how he was pacing the room like his own son, glancing at his watch every now and then. Then his cell phone rang. The man rushed to the table where he had left it. He saw that the call came from the hospital. With trembling hands, he picked up the phone. "Robert, hello." The voice belonged to the head doctor of the clinic, and this alone clearly did not bode well. Besides, the person he was talking to was clearly nervous and even stuttered a little. "What's wrong with Emily?" Robert asked sharply, not exchanging a greeting. "Robert, be strong. Emily didn't survive the birth. The doctors tried to resuscitate her. Believe me, we did everything we could, but we couldn't. And the children, Robert interrupted him. The children are alive and completely healthy. 3 beautiful girls. But I don't even know how to tell you. There's more bad news for you. How much worse to his horror, the man heard his voice shaking as well as his hands. You see, the head doctor remarked, your son was brought to us in the emergency room. He's been in a traffic accident, and his condition isn't too good. How not too good despite his trembling? There was a threatening note in Robert's voice. He's in a coma, the doctor reported after some pause. Stand by. I'm on my way. Robert dropped the phone and hung up. The phone fell out of his hand. Yes, and he himself sat down on the floor. He couldn't remember if he had ever cried in his entire life, but now he felt tears running down his cheeks. Robert grasped his own hair with his hands and yanked it up sharply, but he felt no pain. He felt as if his whole life had collapsed and crumbled in an instant. Poor Emily had died in childbirth, and his son, his only son, was now on the verge of life and death. What had he done so badly in this life? What had brought such misfortune not only on himself, but also on the closest and most beloved people? As if from outside he heard his own quiet sobs. It took Robert about half an hour to come to his senses. Hastily dressed, he called a cab, rightly reasoning that he shouldn't drive in such a state. After all, he still had his granddaughters to care for. When he got to the hospital, its leaders met him in full force. Everyone was fawning and generally behaving in such a way that only excellent upbringing prevented Robert from getting into a fight. As if their apologies and assurances that nothing was their fault could make a difference, bring Emily back or cure his poor son. It's like this, then he said firmly. You'd better, instead of giving me gigs here, keep an eye on my son's condition. If anything happens to him, you'll be in the dock for sure. Do I make myself clear? Understood, the head doctor assured him as he continued to stammer. Good, if he needs anything at all, I don't know, medication, equipment, or whatever, and you can't get it, contact me immediately. Of course, Robert, thank you. Now about my granddaughters. Can I see them right away? They'll need to be in the hospital for a while. Triplets are always born small, said the head of the maternity ward. I'm told they're perfectly healthy, aren't they? Yes, that's correct. For their age and the fact that there are 3 of them. But we need to check everything out, make sure there's nothing life-threatening, and bring them up to normal vitals. Okay, one last thing, Robert sighed heavily. I need to pick up my sister-in-law's body, tomorrow, I think. I mean, her parents passed away not too long ago, so it turns out I'm the only person close to her. At least I don't know anything about anyone else. He left the hospital, unable to find the strength to go into the room to look at the newborn granddaughters. Of course he would have to, but not now. He wasn't sure he could take the ordeal yet, so too much upheaval for one day, which was also going to be one of the happiest of his life. A few days later, he organized Emily's funeral, attended by Robert himself, and a few of her acquaintances, all the contacts he could find. Naturally, he had no idea how his sister-in-law would have wanted to be buried. They'd never talked about such a thing, so he built everything up as he saw fit. That same day, he went to the hospital again to check on his son and deal with his granddaughters. Entering the room where the children were lying, he immediately recognized them. You bet. 3 absolutely identical little girls. But what was a complete surprise to Robert was that they were not alone and not under the care of the medical staff. They were being held in his arms by a woman he didn't know at all, and not just holding them, but holding each of the babies to her own breast in turn. And I'm sorry, who are you? He inquired. I'm Kate, and you must be Robert. My sister said you were coming in to get the girls. I'm sorry, I just have a lot of milk, and the babies are hungry. Natural milk is better than formula. Emily and I gave birth together. Where's your baby? Don't you have enough for everyone? Robert asked. He immediately regretted his curiosity. The young woman's eyes filled with tears and she cried, but she cried quietly, quite still. It must have been so as not to disturb the babies. He had the impression that this was not the first time she had done such a thing. Must be all about his granddaughters, ever since their mom died. I'm sorry, Kate said, pulling herself together rather quickly. It's just that my boy, he died, or rather, he was born already dead. Ah, that's it. It is you who will pardon me for my tactless question. Oh, really, Kate said. You didn't know, did you? Robert, will you wait while I feed the girls? Yes, of course, he said thoughtfully. For a while, both were silent. There was an almost perfect silence in the room, interrupted only by the quiet smacking of one of the babies. Listen, Kate, Robert finally interrupted the silence. Would you, by any chance, like to come and work for me? Babysitting the children. I don't know how to handle them at all, and I'm working. And you can feed them and take care of them. Oh, I don't know, she mumbled embarrassedly. Kate shifted her gaze from the girls to their grandfather and back again. On the one hand, the offer was very good for her from all angles. She really needed the job. Besides, this way she would not have to leave the babies, to whom she was magnetically attracted by the maternal instinct. On the other hand, it was uncomfortable to accept such an offer. It meant that she would have to live in the house of this rich, but deeply unhappy man. Wouldn't her presence somehow disturb him, and could he be trusted? After all, there was no telling what he really had in mind. She didn't know him at all. But in the end, maternal instinct overpowered all other considerations and fears. Kate couldn't imagine how she would be able to part with the little girl she had grown attached to. Of course, they couldn't replace her dead son, but at least they could ease her grief and loneliness. "I agree," she said at last. "Good," Robert echoed. "Then let's pack up and go home. Unless, of course, you're medically cleared by now." "I was the one who was medically cleared from day one," Kate sighed. Gradually, their lives began to get better. Robert gave Kate and the girls a whole floor in his house. At first, they hardly crossed paths, only in those rare moments when he found time and energy to look at his granddaughters. But slowly, they began to get used to each other and eventually began to periodically drink tea together in the living room and have long, intimate conversations. Kate became not only a nanny for Robert's granddaughters, but also a kind of outlet for him. In some way, she reminded him of his son, and in time he began to treat her as if she were his own daughter, and she, who had never known a father's love, also began to feel some kindred warmth and affection for him. But of course, he did not forget and regularly looked into the hospital and checked how his son is doing. If at first the doctors could not say anything clear, then after a couple of months already assured that the son will definitely recover. The immediate threat to life had passed, the chief doctor explained to him personally. "All the indicators are getting better every day. I can say with certainty that very soon he will be out of coma. We are already talking about weeks, if not days. With the best of luck, of course. Medicine, unfortunately, can never be certain of anything." Robert replied in the sternest possible tone, so try to keep this arrangement favorable. However, it was not only his father who was particularly interested in the patient's health. A young and very pretty nurse named Lisa carefully caught every word of the doctors concerning Jack. The reason for this was not the desire to do her job as best as possible. I did not want to work anywhere and never. Her main desire was to find herself a husband, first of all rich, but also young and handsome if possible. And here was just such a case. All three qualities in one man, who in addition was now absolutely certain to be unmarried with 3 children. But this is trifles. Children can be thrown on the nanny and then put in some boarding school. So she tried to take care of a promising patient, practically not appearing in other wards. Of course, while he is in a coma, is unlikely to be able to appreciate her efforts. But then they'll tell him who was there all the time, and his father will see how much she cares for his son, and that's important too. So it was no surprise that when Jack came to, it was Lisa who was next to him, young, beautiful, and at that very moment carefully adjusting his pillow. "Girl," he said in a weak voice, "where am I?" "Well, I guess I'm in the hospital. But what's happened to me? And who are you?" "You don't remember anything, do you?" Out of surprise, Lisa didn't even realize that she should have addressed him as you. "I remember some things, of course, but honestly, more from childhood and college years. That's what's been going on lately, and how I found myself here. Oh, what a headache." "Okay, honey, don't be nervous," Lisa said firmly. "You don't have to try to remember. The memory will come on its own, and this will really only make your head fall apart. Lie down, get some rest. I need to inform your dad that you came to your senses," and she literally flew out of the room under his perplexed question. "So what happened to me? And who do I think you are?" But Lisa wasn't listening anymore. In her cunning head instantly matured a plan of action. What luck. Came to his senses and still does not remember anything. The best could not have been wished. There was only one small detail left, convincing his father to play along with her, and that's exactly what she was going to do. Robert rushed to the hospital as fast as he could. He wanted to go to his son's room immediately, but Lisa was already waiting for him on the doorstep with a worried expression on her face. Glancing at the nurse, the father felt a familiar vague unease. "Hello, Robert." "Hello. Lisa, you said Jack has come to his senses. I'd like to see him." "Of course, by all means. But before I do, I'd like to ask you to give me literally a minute of your time." "What is it?" "Is something wrong?" "You see, an unforeseen complication. He's lost his memory of the last few years of his life. At the very least, he doesn't remember recent events, not the accident, not his wife. Perhaps it's a simple displacement of dramatic memories, and frankly, that's even a good thing." "Good," Robert marveled. "Well, yes, you think about it. He's still quite weak, just coming to his senses. And then it comes at him all at once, like a snowball. His wife died, leaving him with 3 daughters. You could go crazy like that. So you're suggesting we don't tell him about Emily? More to the point, I'm suggesting we tell him he has a fiancée, quite alive and well, and that would sound quite plausible. After all, I've been courting him for so long. Surely he'll be told about it soon enough." But Robert stretched out doubtfully. "What's that for?" Okay, not remembering traumatic events, I can understand that. But why lie about it? Why let him think he's doing well in his life? He's got a fiancée and everything. He'll get better faster that way. That's what I'm telling you as a medical man. Robert hesitated for a while longer. The idea didn't seem so good to him, and he didn't plan to lie to his son. On the other hand, he had no reason to doubt that Lisa only wished Jack well. After all, he'd really always seen her wooing him. Well, maybe the girl fell in love and decided to take a little advantage of the situation. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe she could actually help him avoid a serious crisis. After all, they'll always have time to tell the truth, and their son's health is more important than abstract arguments about morality. All right, he said after a long silence. If you think so, I believe you. Let's do it that way. Lisa became Jack's official bride, and for him to actually believe it. Robert had a difficult job ahead of him. All the things and pictures, everything that could remind him of his wife, was carefully removed out of sight and hidden in the farthest closet behind a lock, just in case. But there were still the children, a living and vivid reminder that not so long ago Jack had a beloved wife. After some thought, Robert decided to rent a separate apartment for Kate. Kate, of course, remained unfazed by this plan. Robert, you'll excuse me, of course. None of my business. But is it possible to deceive your own son like this? I'm not happy about the idea myself, sweetheart, but what's to be done? His sister says it's the best thing for him. Seems to me that Nurse cares more about her own gain than your son, Kate said bluntly. Maybe you're right, Robert retorted sadly, but so is she in some ways. I honestly think it would be best if we didn't remind him of Emily, at least for the time being. You don't worry, I'm making sure they don't do anything stupid well. As long as you make sure I'm cool, Kate smiled. The nurse's plan still seemed like some kind of dubious scam to her, but she could see that it was beyond her power to change Robert's mind. So all she could do was, as before, to keep an eye on the baby and hope that the deception Jack's father had pulled would not lead to disaster after all. A month later, Jack was discharged from the hospital, and she and Lisa moved into Robert's spacious home. The nurse continued to play the role of a caring bride, and, it should be noted, coped with it quite well. However, her fiancé still did not look particularly happy, although he agreed to live with her under the same roof. You, forgive me, Lisa, he said guiltily, but I don't feel anything for you. Well, that is, I realized that before I felt, but now nothing. That's all right. It will pass, and your feelings will come back. And with them your memory. Everything will come. You just have to be patient. You know, I feel like I've forgotten something else really, really important. I just can't remember what it is. I think we both realize that you're the one who's forgotten our love. It's really important. But I'm not angry, I understand. I'm a medical professional. Yeah, sure, Jack said hesitantly. He didn't want to offend Lisa, and so he didn't tell her everything he thought, including things he was firmly convinced of. It wasn't what he'd forgotten at all that she was trying to convince him of. There was something else in his life, something very important and very serious, something that normal people don't forget. But he couldn't find a single thread that would lead him to those memories, not a single detail to hold on to. Lisa, for her part, had no interest in Jack remembering anything, so much so that she was doing her best to keep the memory from coming back to him, at least not before she became his wife. And even if the truth were to come out, the marriage could not be dissolved so easily. Besides, Emily had persuaded Robert to take part in the adventure. So if anything happens, what can she do? She'll say she was just trying to be helpful and all that. Even Jack's father agreed with her, and the fact that instead of pills to restore his memory, she gave him drugs with exactly the opposite effect. It still has to be proved. And who would even think of suggesting such a thing? It's not fatal. No, even if the legend failed, she was in no danger. But she didn't want it to fail too soon. As part of her therapy, she insisted that Jack spend as much time with her as possible. He didn't like the idea, not knowing why he wanted peace and solitude. But he had no intention of refusing his supposed fiancée, either out of fear of offending her or hoping that it would really help him to remember what really never happened. And so one day, Lisa literally dragged Jack out on a date to the park. Say, fresh air, fall leaves, romance, and they always loved it. She even made up a whole story about the fact that supposedly in this park they met, and then often walked here. For a moment, it seemed to work. Their conversation gradually became warmer and more frank. And it was at that very moment that Lisa noticed Kate. She recognized her immediately, despite the fact that they'd only seen each other a couple of times, and only in passing. She couldn't stand babies, especially small ones, and that's why she tried not to look in the delivery rooms. Still, sometimes she had to do her duty. She would probably know Kate, even if she'd never seen her in her life. How many women stroll through the park with a stroller designed for 3 babies at once? An extremely expensive stroller at that. It could hardly have been a mere coincidence. Lisa panicked. What on earth are you doing, you old stump, she thought angrily. I couldn't you have found her an apartment in a more remote neighborhood? Or is life not good enough without constantly running around looking at those ugly, ugly creatures? She tried to distract Jack by showing him a particularly pretty leaf, or even to get him off the path, but she realized immediately that it was useless. Jack had already noticed the unusual triple stroller and was staring at it. He quickened his step, bringing the inevitable encounter closer, and peered unceremoniously inside. She protested, but when she saw Lisa, she realized who was in front of her. She realized she couldn't help but let her father look at her daughters. Jack took a long, hard look at the children's faces. When he finally looked up, tears welled up in his eyes. "Emily," he whispered to Lisa, "where is my wife, Emily?" Lisa stood there, unable to utter a word, just gulping for air as if she had been hit over the head with something heavy. In an instant, all her plans and dreams had crumbled, all because of some idiot who couldn't find a better time to go out with the kids. Then to add to that, seeing her condition, Kate's voice came up. "Jack, I shouldn't be the one to tell you this, but your wife, alas, is no longer alive. I think it would be best for you to tell your father that you remember everything, and he will answer all your questions." Jack didn't even bother to inquire about the stranger's identity. He was overwhelmed by the memories, and on top of that, the realization that his beloved was no longer alive. He was only able to get home with Kate's help. Lisa, of course, had made her way to participate as well, but he'd recoiled from her like a leper. In the end, Lisa just weaved behind the couple with the stroller, boiling with anger and hatred. When Kate reached Robert's house, she pressed the bell. Jack couldn't find his keys out of shock. Lisa, in turn, was in no hurry to come to his aid. Only when he opened the door and looked at his son and Kate, his father immediately realized everything. Letting the couple with the stroller inside, he resolutely blocked the mayor's sister's path. "Your services are apparently no longer needed," he said dryly. "But I'm for Jack," Lisa objected. "You convinced me to deceive my own son," Robert retorted. "I did think it was best for him, but now I suspect I was cruelly mistaken. You're free to go, Lisa," and he firmly slammed the door right in her face. Robert had yet to have an explanation with his son, a clearly difficult and very emotional one. Kate had joined the conversation, and the two of them were able to convey the terrible truth to Jack. He, of course, was stunned by the revelations, but forgave his father for his deception, realizing that he wanted what was best. The thought of Emily no longer alive made Jack want to tear his hair out. For the first minute, he wished he hadn't been killed in the accident, but then he came to his senses, remembering that his life still had meaning. To be more precise, 3 meanings. 3 living, healthy little girls, not just his, but Emily's parts as well. He had to live for them, had to do everything he could to give them a good future. Jack didn't mind going back to Kate's house. After all, Anna was still the girl's breadwinner, and besides, she was doing a great job with other maternal duties, and was, however briefly, Emily's friend. Despite his decision to live for his children, Jack spent the first few weeks grieving for his dead wife, then slowly began to be included in the work, and quickly realized that it gives him a certain peace of mind, or at least the ability to be tired enough that there was no energy left to think about anything else. But even this period in his life passed. Of course, he continued to work hard to get his 3 daughters back on their feet, but he no longer pushed himself to the point of exhaustion. Gradually, Jack began to join Kate and Robert's evening tea parties, and pretty quickly he realized that they had a lot in common. He began accompanying Kate on outings with her daughters, partly to be with his babies, partly for Kate's own sake. At the same time, it cannot be said that between them arose any romantic feelings. Rather, they perceived each other as brother and sister from those happy families, where the son and daughter are able to find a common language with each other. Lisa, however, was unaware of such details. After she had been politely but insistently kicked out of the rich house and the life she had dreamed of, the girl had become obsessed. She was always somewhere near the family, watching, looking for a way to avenge her humiliation. Her dreams had collapsed. When she saw Jack, who seemed happy enough, walking peacefully with Kate and the children, she lost her ability to think straight. She assumed, of course, that the two were having an affair, and that the hick who had made her lose everything was now taking the place she had rightly thought of as her own. And soon Lisa had a chance for revenge. She'd been waiting for it for so long. Jack, after another hard day at work, forgot to turn on the alarm system in the house, which did not go unnoticed by the intruder. That same day, she broke into someone else's home and thought of nothing better than to steal all 3 children. The owners were sleeping peacefully in their beds, but she had no further plan. And Kate, checking on the children regularly, quickly discovered the disappearance. Lisa was eventually captured very close to Robert's house. She wandered senselessly through the neighborhood streets, holding the stolen babies in her arms. Luckily, all the children turned out to be alive and well. Besides, they were too young for such an incident to have any negative impact on them, and Lisa was quickly committed to a psychiatric hospital. Her insanity was too obvious, so no one even pushed for any other kind of punishment. "Thank you," Kate Roberts said to her, right after the granddaughters were safely home. "What would we do without you?" "Living with your son's mentally unstable fiancé," Kate smirked, and they laughed. But soon Robert grew serious again. "Kate," he said, "I know you're going to argue with me now, but I assure you it's absolutely useless. The fact is that I have decided to put you in my will on an equal footing with Jack." "You shouldn't," Robert, Kate protested immediately. "Look, I've already made my decision, and I'm not going to change it. After all, you've become like a daughter to me in all this time. But what do you want me to do? As far as I know, it's completely unnecessary to get a person's consent in order to put them in the will. Unfortunately, it is. But to do that, it would be nice to know the person's full name and date of birth. Of course, I can figure all that out without your input, but I thought it was better to ask you anyway. Yeah, it seemed right, Kate sighed. But are you firmly convinced of your decision? She stopped talking and looked questioningly at Robert. He nodded seriously. Smith Kate Alex, she said. The man's reaction to those words was startling. He sat back in his chair, clutching his heart. Kate rushed to him, pulling a phone from the back pocket of her jeans to call an ambulance. But there was no need. A few seconds later, Robert, though not fully conscious, at least stopped holding his chest and gasping for breath. Smith, he interjected in a trembling voice. Oh, and Alex, too. Could just be a coincidence, of course, but something tells me. What are you even talking about? Kate asked in surprise. Mom, your mom's name wasn't Nina by any chance, Robert answered question for question. Kate nodded. She felt like she couldn't speak, and it was getting kind of hard to breathe. Now she realized what Robert was getting at and looked at him, waiting for some sort of explanation. Smith Nina, you see. That was the name of my first love. I had to break up. My parents were strongly against such an unequal marriage, and I didn't even know she was pregnant. If I had known, I would have run away from home. The man couldn't finish his sentence. Tears came to his eyes. Kate, just as stunned as he was, rushed to hug her father, whom she had found after all these years. A little later, they did a DNA test which confirmed Kate's hunch. Indeed, it turned out she was Robert's daughter, Jack's sister and the aunt of the girls she had breastfed her own breast. A few years later, Jack was able to finally get over the death of the woman he loved and remarried a co-worker. One of the main factors that determined his choice was that his new spouse got along well with the girls. By a strange coincidence, her name was Emily and a little earlier found his happiness Kate. Married a good friend Jack a few years later, she gave birth to a healthy son. Carefully observing the entire pregnancy, they continued to live in Robert's spacious home, which seemed designed for just that number of people. Now, filled with children's laughter and evening conversations in the living room, it no longer seemed empty and neglected. Edward slowly drove out of the office parking lot and headed towards the center. The businessman's car maneuvered confidently between the rows of cars, the owners of which in about 10 or 20 minutes would quite expectedly hit rush hour. Tuning the radio to his favorite wave, Edward Reynolds wondered how his son Volan was doing. Was Stacy doing well? It's tough. 7 years in the same wheelchair, and why should the little one have to go through such an ordeal? Tears glistened in the corners of the businessman's eyes. The recent conversation with Jacob, the pediatric orthopedist, came to mind. What can I say, Edward? I've examined Voland, and I'll tell you this, I found no abnormalities. You see, I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, your son's ailment is not physical, but rather psychological. So Voland has no injuries or trauma. Will he be able to walk as he used to? Edward asked hopefully. The doctor furrowed his brow, trying to find the right words for the businessman. Depends on what you mean by the word injury. Of course, as such in terms of the physical, your son doesn't have one. But the psyche is a special thing, little studied. As they say, nothing is certain. No, don't be frightened, of course. Your son will overcome the disease and get back on his feet. But it's very, very, very early to talk about any specific time frame. Edward sighed sadly. Jacob had given him hope, and then he'd taken it away. Now, as he thought back to the conversation with the doctor, Edward could barely contain the despair that was gripping him. Wolan's mother had died when he was 2 years old. The boy barely remembered her and had only seen her in photographs. 8 months ago, his stepmother appeared in his life. Edward lived alone for about 5 years, devoting himself completely to his son. But when that terrible robbery happened and Volan stopped walking, he realized that they couldn't go anywhere without a woman's hand. The only problem for Edward was choosing medical personnel for his son, simply put, a nurse. Volan had the temperament of his late grandfather, and it was very difficult to please him. All Edward could hear was, "Dad, don't take offense, but Vicky's no good for me. She won't read books, and she sits on her phone all day. She's even worse than the last auntie, but she plays with me. It's true, she does it by force. But I can feel her eyes are lifeless, like she's a robot." Like something out of a space movie, Edward's heart clenched in pity. What could be easier than finding a caregiver for a little boy? But in reality, it was a lottery of one way or the other. Stacy had tried too. No luck. And she needs a new nurse. But where do we find one? Everyone's used to a nurse taking care of a bedridden patient. And here's a boy who can't walk, but has a lot of energy. That's where the difficulties arise. The businessman thought on his way home and decided to stop at the store. Edward pulled into the parking lot in front of the supermarket. He knew that Stacy didn't like going to grocery stores, so he'd taken on that responsibility recently. Business partner Jonathan only chuckled when he found Eddie's fiancée. First time I've ever seen a man think about what to make for dinner. What's your job? To provide for your family. To have something to buy bread with, preferably with butter. The rest is up to her. Edward blushed at such remarks and tried to turn the conversation to another direction as quickly as possible. For him, growing up in the countryside, going to the store was no big deal. The most important thing was to have something to go to the store with, and the rest was nothing. When he entered the supermarket, Edward picked up his basket and headed for the freshly baked goods section. Wolin loved sweets, and he tried to spoil him from time to time. Fresh cinnamon buns, pies with cherries, pears, jam, and more. His eyes widened. Suddenly, Edward's attention was drawn to the sound of Penelope. It was coming from the neighboring convenience store. Help, somebody. There's a man down here. Call an ambulance, please. Edward flinched and reached for his pocket, forgetting that he'd left his smartphone in the car. Hey, for fuck's sake. Okay, gotta see what's what. Maybe some other help is needed when the businessman walked into the neighboring department. A sad picture unfolded before his eyes. An elderly man, a pensioner, lay on his back with no outward signs of life. Nearby, a basket with a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a couple of packs of breadcrumbs, which had toppled over during the fall, was lying orphaned. The people surrounding the man stood around, unsure of what to do next. Or maybe he's just drunk, put forward one of the eyewitnesses a completely ridiculous hypothesis. What are you, a man? Ivan is intelligent, and clutched at his heart. I saw him. I was standing about 5 meters away from him, objected a woman. Suddenly, someone pulled Edward aside and squeezed his way to the center of the circle of people that had formed. Disperse, please. Allow me, came a pleasant female voice. The businessman shifted his gaze to the stranger who had volunteered to help and literally froze on the spot with amazement. It was a real tramp. No, not dirty, of course, and no odor of alcohol or cigarettes, but the clothes and shoes left a lot to be desired, plus an old, worn-out Penelope cloak. But the main thing was not even in this, but in the fact that, kneeling down, this stranger about 30 years old began to do Grandpa indirect heart massage. Everyone gasped in surprise, as if they wanted to do the same thing before, but just did not have time. And that's when the unwitting spectators of the unfolding drama went and began to fuss around, trying to help. Someone dialed the number of the ambulance. Someone gave advice, valuable and not so valuable. However, the woman did everything as it should be done, and the confirmation of this was a quiet wheeze from the chest of a man lying on the floor. Thank God, alive, ran through the crowd. Just as the ambulance arrived, the paramedics rushing to the scene entered the supermarket lobby. The tramp disappeared into the crowd and was about to disappear when Edward touched her arm. Oh, wait, don't go. Would you like a ride? The woman looked ironically at the respectable businessman standing in front of her. You will. And why? I don't think you want to ask me out. Then what's this all about? I'm not too far away, so thank you, but I'll pass. Edward blushed embarrassed, but he didn't back down. I'm sorry, I may have misspoken. You see, or rather my son needs help. She shook her head. And how can I help you? I'm not a medical professional, not right now anyway. And children require special treatment. No, I'm not the right person for you. Edward turned dark. The flame of hope was slowly fading, sinking more and more into the abyss of sadness. Suddenly, as if remembering something, the businessman reached into his pocket and pulled out a photograph. Here, look. This is my son Voland. He is 7. He can't walk, though he's not disabled, but he really needs help. Maybe you'll do it? The stranger took the picture carefully, and her hands trembled. My God, he's so small. Why did he have to go through all this? Edward could feel her hesitating as she looked at him. In truth, he didn't know the real reason for his choice. It was reckless, to say the least, to invite a man from the street into the house. On the other hand, the way the stranger had rescued the elderly customer deserved respect, for not everyone had such specific skills. My name is Edward. Don't be afraid, I won't hurt you and I'll pay you generously for my services. At least give it a try. If it doesn't work out, I won't consider you an enemy or a bad person. You can live in our house. There's plenty of room for everyone. I don't even think about it, Edward said again. I'm Stacy Smirnoff. He looked at her hopefully. So you agree? Am I getting this right? Stacy smiled for the first time since they'd met. I do. Where can I get away from you? But I'm not making any promises. After all, I've hardly ever worked with children. But before, I mean. In a previous life. Edward nodded, and then invited her to the car. He didn't feel like shopping today. especially after what had happened at the store. On the way to her employer's house, Stacy behaved modestly, keeping quiet, glancing out the window occasionally. Edward didn't ask any questions, realizing that his new acquaintance needed time to settle in. As she sat in the front seat of the huge SUV, Stacy literally disappeared into it, becoming almost invisible and very small. Edward winked at her and sped up. The businessman drove the car confidently, expertly. Stacy relaxed and drifted off to sleep. Fortunately, it wasn't a long drive, and soon Edward's house was in sight. Or rather, his late wife Vivi's. To be precise, and Edward valued precision above all else. Here we are. Oh, I forgot to tell you, for the sake of convenience, I'd like to use you without any patronymics and so on. I'm a simple man from the village. It's easier for me, Edward said, pulling the car in front of the house. Stacy nodded in embarrassment and opened the door, leaving the cozy interior of the SUV. It was early fall, and a sharp gust of wind made her body shiver. As the sun set, it was getting quite chilly. The guests' clothes were, to put it mildly, inappropriate for the season. Edward realized that and headed for the door to go inside, but Stacy was already at the door. What are you doing out so late? I called you several times, but I couldn't get through. Oh, we have company. Oh, I see. Stacy glanced at Edward, but he shrugged to ease the awkwardness. The businessman asked, "Where is my favorite son? Why isn't he meeting his daddy?" Stacy pursed her lips in frustration. And Volan was in a bad mood again. He threw a construction set out the window. Can you believe it? That's not true. It wasn't like that at all. My son's voice came from the next room. What was it like then? Tell Daddy don't be shy, Stacy snapped at him. I didn't throw it away. I shared it with my friends. Their parents didn't have the money to buy one, so I threw it down from the window to the boys in a box. Let them play. I'm not sorry, Volan objected and left the room in his wheelchair. He shared. How could he? You're such a smart ass. Have you thought how much money that purchase cost your father? When you start earning your own money, then you'll be able to manage your things. But you don't work, Aunt Stacy. But you do manage Daddy's money, Volan said, catching his stepmother off guard. Stacy coughed embarrassedly, signaling that she wasn't enjoying the family squabble. Come on. I'll show you where your room is. Edward caught up and pointed down the long hallway. Volan gave Stacy a wary look and thought, well, another nurse. I bet she'll be on the phone 24 hours a day. Stacy looked at her stepson with hatred, though in truth he had done nothing wrong. In spite of his young age, Volan had already developed his own opinions that were at odds with Stacy's. This often caused friction between the two of them. Only Edward could stop it. Stacy had prepared all sorts of goodies and delicacies for dinner. Stacy, as always, is on top of her game. What's with all this? We're not going to eat it anyway, Edward asked with a smile. I got carried away. It just came out of the blue. You know I like to cook, she said with pride in her voice. At the same time, she threw an angry glance at Volan. The boy obediently lowered his eyes and began picking at his salad with his fork. In fact, he knew very well that Stacy had not cooked anything and had purchased all this culinary splendor at a restaurant, ordering a dozen dishes for home delivery. Volan remembered well the time his stepmother had almost burned down the kitchen when she had tried to make him an omelet. Stacy had ended up handing him a package of instant noodles and recommending that he pour hot water over them. Of course, Edward didn't know about all of this, as his fiancée was very cunning and forward-thinking. Stacy sat silently at dinner, mentally berating herself for accepting the businessman's proposal. Stacy stared at her, unbidden, like a shopper picking things out at the market. What? You don't use that knife? Can't you eat with a fork? She tried to tease her guest. No, it's just more comfortable for me, Stacy said modestly. Stacy grinned, not noticing Volan's judgmental look. Frankly speaking, the boy did not like the behavior of his stepmother, who from the first minutes of their conversation began to pretend to be a queen. She's no better than Stacy herself, he thought. At least the guest is calm and doesn't ask questions like the other aunts who worked in the house. After dinner, everyone went to their rooms. Stacy had one now, though she preferred to go to Volan's room first. Hi, I'm Stacy. You probably already know this, but I'm your new nurse. I'm going to be your nurse from now on. The boy looked at her in disbelief. Just like that. And other aunts immediately tried to cure me, made me do gymnastics, called me lazy. They said I didn't want to help myself. Stacy shook her head sadly. No, why would I try to cure you if you didn't want me to? I'm right. It's easier for you, it's more familiar. Volan's indignation took his breath away. What are you talking about? I really want to, but I can't walk. I believe you. I believe you. But if you don't want to heal yourself, no one can help you get out of that wheelchair. Not even me. And you know everything. That's why you're so smart. You're just a nurse. Aren't you? Volan said uncertainly. But Stacy did not answer the question. She'd gotten the effect of her words so she could go to bed with a clear conscience. Edward caught up with her at the door to her room, holding a large bag. Here, take it. It's clothes, all new. They're my late wife Vivi's. She never even wore it. I never got around to throwing it away. Don't worry, it's only temporary. You seem to be the same size as her. I knew it right away. But please don't tell Stacy, or she'll be offended. Stacy was embarrassed. Edward suddenly appeared to her in a completely different light. It was as if he'd been standing there in total darkness, and the people around him could only guess at his appearance. Thank you very much. I'll wear them carefully, Stacy murmured softly, taking the bag. Edward went to his office to work on the month's reports. He'd been having a lot of trouble lately, although in the businessman's opinion he couldn't complain. Sitting down at his desk, he looked at Volan's picture in a flowery frame and thought about the times when his son had not had such health problems as he had now. And all this was the result of the trauma he had suffered, not physical but psychological. Edward blamed himself for what had happened. He'd been advised to equip the house with all sorts of sensors and surveillance cameras, hire a couple or 3 guards, finally get a wolfhound with a voice that would make passersby shake. But no, he relied on his good reputation in business circles. A high-profile robbery has put everything in its place, and subsequently led to irreparable consequences. No, Volan, none of the raiders did not offend, but the shock experienced by the boy during the robbery was so strong that his legs failed. Actually, the robbery itself was without casualties. Masked robbers knew perfectly well the location of rooms in the house and the owner's daily routine, so they quickly found the safes in Edward's study. What happened next was a matter of technique: the break-in, the shouts of joy, and the theft of a large sum of money. Little Volan stood in the corner and watched in horror as the black-masked men filled a bag with valuables and money. One of the raiders turned and jokingly threatened the boy with his finger. Volan pressed his back into the wall and covered his eyes with his palms. Schwer's Penelope maid could no longer help and idly watched her master being robbed. After surviving the raid, she quit the next day, leaving Edward alone with his problems. Volan withdrew into himself, lying on his bed for days at a time. The shock he had suffered caused him to develop partial paralysis of his lower limbs. At first, Edward thought that his son's ailment would pass rather quickly. Everyone has unpleasant memories in their lives, and it's okay they walk. If the businessman only knew how wrong he was. It is not surprising when there are so many counselors around, each of whom is so eager to make his own contribution. Don't worry, he'll be fine. The main thing is that the bones are intact, and everything else is not so important. The main thing for a boy is to have the right physique, to be tall and strong, and your Voland will be just like that. You'll see, you mark my word, Jonathan said. Edward nodded in agreement, trying to find the strength to believe what was causing him the greatest fear. Edward was used to being treated with condescension in business circles. It was as if the gods had come down from Olympus to bless a mere mortal. They say that he has made his way into the elite. Well done. It was about time he showed zeal. Edward knew that many envied him. A rich widower who got $1 million after his wife died in his will. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And Edward had taken it. He grabbed it by the tail, much to the dismay of the others. Virtually no one doubted that it was a marriage of convenience. What else could it be? When you marry the daughter of Jacob's richest man. But Edward himself was not a wealthy man. He married Vivi for love alone. And so that no one would think the guy had fallen for his rich bride's assets, he'd even agreed to sign a prenup. That's the right thing to do. That's the way it's done in our circle. No offense. No, but if the marriage is equal, it's different, you know. Everything is equal. You're not a Rothschild, Jacob said. Edward didn't take offense, he understood, and he didn't expect any different treatment. To everyone, he was just another capital hunter for his rich bride, a puppet in the hands of his father-in-law, who played his son-in-law like an experienced puppeteer. No one could even think that Edward cared about Vivi, not her dowry in a foreign bank, cars, luxury homes, and all the other tinsel that the rich of all ranks and colors so often bragged about. Unfortunately, in marriage they lived only 2 years, although before that they met for 3. And all because the father of the bride deliberately delayed the wedding, expecting that the young parted, and the problem will solve itself. What do I need this poor man for? Whose son is he? The tractor driver's son. His mother is unemployed. What kind of status is that? A housewife. What can she do for a housewife? Tip the cow's tails, Jacob was talking to his wife, who was Vivi's stepmother. Trixie looked at her husband ironically. She didn't want to judge Edward, nor did she want to get into an argument with him, so she preferred to stay neutral. It was better for herself and the people around her. At the time of the wedding, Edward was working as a management trainee in Jacob's office. He wasn't exactly a star in the sky. How could he, when he'd graduated from university only 6 months ago, and by correspondence, since he'd been working as a longshoreman to keep from starving in a city so foreign and hostile to him? No one could have guessed that it wouldn't be long before Edward would be the first violinist in the company. "Oh, son, you seem to be making a big mistake. They'll ruin you, the rich people. Nothing is sacred to them. I can see the way they look at you. You're just a servant to them," Edward's mother said bitterly. But the boy did not give up and accepted all the trials with the proper humility, signed a marriage contract, according to which in case of divorce he received nothing. But Edward did not despair. He sincerely loved his wife, and when she gave him Voland, he began to love even more. The birth of his grandson melted the ice in Jacob's heart. His heartfelt conversations with his son-in-law were more and more often accompanied by warm notes. It was still a long way from complete harmony, but Edward didn't want it. Then Jacob's family was haunted by an evil fate. First, Jacob, the head of the company, fell gravely ill. Neither money, nor doctors, nor elite private clinics helped. Many said at the time that this was payback for the years of frenzied accumulation of initial capital, writer takeovers, not so legal schemes, and now the unshakable colossus had fallen, approaching ordinary mortals at arm's length. Deep down, Edward sympathized with his father-in-law and held no grudge. What was there to be angry about when he was the kind of man who couldn't be changed? Jacob was fading before his eyes. There was nothing the family could do. No folk healer, no fortune tellers, no expensive drugs from abroad helped. Trixie's wife stayed with him every step of the way, trying to ease his condition. But it was all in vain. Jacob was gone. 3 days before his 50th birthday, standing at his father-in-law's fresh grave, Edward didn't know that it would only be a year before the same fate would befall his wife. Her life had been cut short by bilateral pneumonia. It was freezing cold when she went skiing with her friends. Vivi always watched her figure and liked to give her body physical activity. That fateful day, Edward tried to dissuade her. "Maybe another time would be better, Vivi. Really, such a drastic change. Yesterday it was 0, and today it's almost -20. But his wife immediately reassured him. "Don't worry, Edward. Everything will be fine. It's not the first time I've done this. We have to seize the moment or summer will come. And then what? You know you have to act while you can. Well, you know best, of course. Just please be careful." Vivi hugged her husband lovingly. "I promise Penelope and I won't be long. We'll do a couple laps and then back." If only Edward had known where his wife's innocent amusement would lead. He would never have let her leave the house. That fateful morning, the three of them drove out of town in Vivi's car. The weather was clear and frosty, and there was no sign of trouble. But as soon as the car hit the bridge, the worst happened. Vivi had been distracted for a split second while answering a friend's question, which made her too late to notice the SUV crossing into the oncoming traffic lane. In an attempt to avoid the collision, Penelope swerved the steering wheel to the left and rammed into the bridge supports. The car plummeted into the ice-filled river. The impact was so strong that the mangled body of the car broke through the ice and plunged into the water about half. From afar, the car looked like a float that had lost its integrity and was filling with water. It was slowly going down. Penelope and Vivi began to scream loudly, smashing their palms against the windows. No one wanted to die at that age. Vivi was the first to come to her senses and, unlike her friends, began to squeeze out the windshield because there was a huge crack in it. When she succeeded, there was icy water under her feet. Looking at her friends, Vivi commanded, "Come on, what's the holdup? Hurry up before the car drowns." "Yes, of course," now Penelope whispered, shivering from the cold, and began to climb to the saving edge of the ice. Vivi followed. Vivi was the last to leave the sinking car, like a shipwrecked captain. Unfortunately, at that moment her clothes were soaked through and her body was already pierced by cold needles. Although the ambulance arrived relatively quickly, Vivi suffered severe frostbite, which later gave complications to her lungs. The doctors did everything they could, but medicine was powerless in such cases. With a high fever, Vivi was thrashing around in delirium and begged for a notary to be brought to her. "Honey, you don't have to. Why are you thinking about it? You're going to get better," Edward begged her. He sincerely believed this, because he rightly believed that money could do anything in a certain situation. "God, but it's not cancer." "Aren't there any more effective drugs?" Edward asked the head of the department, but he just shook his head. Vivi could feel herself fading away, and with each breath the life was slowly leaving her disease-ridden body. "Sweet Edward, I'm so sorry about this. Don't worry, I took care of everything. You and Volan won't need anything," Vivi wheezed, gathering the rest of her strength. "Oh, come on, what are you talking about? You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? I'll raise everyone's ears." "We'll find a way out," Edward whispered without noticing the tears on his cheeks. But somewhere upstairs in heaven, the decision had already been made. Kneeling in front of his wife's bed, the young widower covered his face with his hands and sobbed. But why should he have all these cursed riches when his beloved is gone, and his heart is torn with pain? At the sight of this sad picture, the nurses turned pale and hurriedly passed by, and an elderly nurse even crossed herself as she came closer. "You cry, dear man. Some of the pain will come out with your tears, but don't give up. Live in such a way that your spouse will be proud of you. She's up there in heaven, seeing everything." Edward looked longingly at the nurse. "Thank you, but you don't need to comfort me. It still hurts a lot." She touched his arm sympathetically. "It hurts. Honey, do you have children?" "I do." "Then live for them. Children are our future. They are called the flowers of life for a reason. Only flowers bloom for one season, but babies, if you take care of them, are happy for a long time." To Edward's amazement, the elderly nurse's words had a favorable effect on him. There was something in them that made him pull himself together and think of his son, who was still so young that he didn't understand anything. The funeral and all the subsequent mourning took place like a dream for Edward. At the cemetery, standing by the fresh grave, the young widower realized that the rich cried too, but in their own way. But is he rich? It's not all his. The firm company shares elite real estate. And who is he? The son of a tractor driver from the village, who decided to try his luck in the big city. But his happiness was short-lived, and the price for it had to pay the highest, one that makes your head spin and your heart ache. Maybe it was all just a dream. Edward had to pinch his shoulder and everything would be back to normal. The village, the birds singing in the morning, and the smell of freshly cut grass. Water from the well, you drink it like nectar, but the cold makes your teeth chatter. But there was no smell of sleep here. All this was a harsh reality to the point of impossibility. At first, no one saw Edward as the heir to a vast empire. Everyone expected him to make a rash move, and like a house of cards, the whole thing would collapse. And if it did, they'd help him fall anyway. Sooner or later, there would be someone to push him, as they say. But Edward not only held on, but also managed to prove that he was worthy of more than the representatives of the business elite gave him. The widower had to go through a lot before his name and surname became indicators of wealth and success. And while everything was going relatively well in business, in his family, on the contrary, problem after problem followed him like an avalanche. "I can handle it, as long as Stacy is right for Woland." The meeting seemed to go well, but "Don't get too excited," Edward whispered, pushing aside a disturbing memory. At the same time, Stacy was lying in bed, thinking about her future. "I wonder when Edward will propose to me. Or does he think I'll be his mistress forever?" "No, not yet, darling, you won't. That's not why I put up with your crazy son." Edward didn't know all of this, of course, and continued to naively believe that Stacy loved him as much as he had loved Vivi. The next morning after breakfast, Stacy walked into Woland's room. "So, little one, ready to go for a walk with me?" Woland looked at the nurse incredulously to see if she was joking. Those who had gone before her were afraid of walks like fire. It was understandable. If something happened to the boy, who would be responsible? But Stacy persisted. "What's up, Woland? Are you going or not? The weather's really nice today. Golden fall. We're going to collect leaves for the herbarium." "What herbarium?" the boy asked in surprise. "Well, what kind of herbarium?" "For school crafts applications. We'll collect fallen leaves with you. And then we'll take a thick book and put the leaves between the pages. That's what I used to do with my mom," Stacy explained calmly. "Wow, that's cool. Can we go to the pond too? They say there are lots of swans and wild ducks there." Stacy smiled. "We can, of course. Not only is there a pond with swans and geese, but there are squirrels there too. They're very tame. If you give them a piece of breadcrumbs or a bagel, they'll take it right out of the palm of your hand." Woland's eyes became genuinely interested. The boy also looked at the nurse with respect. Stacy treated him like a normal, full-fledged child. No pity, no sugary sweet sympathy paid for out of daddy's voluminous wallet. Stacy helped Woland dress and rolled the stroller to the exit. Edward wasn't home, as he had gotten up at the crack of dawn, as usual, in a hurry to get to the office. Stacy called out to them at the door. "Where do you think you're going?" all dressed up and pretty. "We're going to the park to get some fresh air," Stacy replied. "To the park? Why don't you stay home? The baby's little, and he's sick. What if he gets worse? And who's going to be responsible for that? Are you going to be responsible?" Stacy was indignant. She hadn't really cared about Woland for a long time. The point was different. Stacy had a sudden urge to show her power in the house, to let this girl know who was the boss of the house. Stacy looked sadly at Voland, but the boy didn't want to give up. "I can call Daddy if you want and ask permission. But then I'll also tell him about how we got a delicious dinner on the table last night, and I'll remind him about the burned eggs too." Stacy's face flushed with anger. Okay, he wants to be bossy, that little handicapped kid. On the other hand, Stacy didn't want Edward to see her weaknesses. She'd never been a friend of the kitchen, and not only didn't like cooking, she didn't know how to cook. "All right, go ahead. Just be careful out there and don't linger near the water. It's not summer." Stacy gritted her teeth. Voland looked at Stacy with a smile and winked. "You know what you're doing, Auntie." It was a lovely walk. Stacy showed Voland the most beautiful places in the park, which she knew like the back of her hand. So they first fed the swans and ducks with bread. Then Voland played with the squirrels. Looking at the boy's joyful face, Penelope could not hold back her tears. And maybe this is happiness. The very thing about which so much has been said, a child's laughter. Is it possible to replace it with something of equal importance? Hardly. Hardly. "Are we going to the park tomorrow?" Voland asked. These words immediately brought her out of her agonized reverie. "We shall, of course, if it doesn't rain. You and I haven't collected any leaves today. When I was little, we had a task for the summer at school, to collect and dry leaves, and in the fall to prepare cones and chestnuts. And then we made crafts during labor lessons, hedgehogs, different animals." "Wow, interesting. And I'm not going to school until next year. That's what Daddy decided. But Aunt Stacy's against it. She says, 'I'll have half a day of peace and quiet without you.'" "Hey, Auntie, how do you know the park so well?" Woland asked. The boy's question struck a nerve. It seemed to be a commonplace curiosity, but it was as if a black cat had run through his heart. "I've spent a lot of time here, Voland. First as a student, when I was at university, and then as an adult. I used to come here." Woland looked at Stacy in surprise. "I thought you didn't have to study to be a hobo." "Well, I've seen in movies that the street teaches them. They also sleep in basements and beg for money all the time. But you're not like that. You are special." Penelope looked at the boy with undisguised amazement, still not knowing whether to laugh or be upset. Voland had quickly labeled her a tramp. Oh my God, it was so obvious, and Edward, did he think she was a homeless beggar? Realizing the awkwardness of her own situation, Stacy had to tell the truth. "I'm not a tramp, Woland, and I don't live in a basement." "But that's understandable. You're in the room next door now," the kid objected. Stacy shook her hands. "Oh, you know everything. I wasn't always like this. I used to be an EMT, just so you know." "Just like Dr. Ebelet," Voland persisted. "Yes, just like that. I used to go on calls, treat people, and in my spare time I walked in the park. I didn't write poems, but I did it for my soul." Woland looked at her respectfully. She was a good woman. That Aunt Stacy's such a lady, and a doctor. She can write poetry, and she knows a lot of things. "And then what happened?" the curious boy asked again. Stacy turned pale and furtively brushed away a tear. "I'm sorry, buddy. Let's do it another time. Okay? It's a very grown-up story. You'll think it's not for children's ears. Just don't tell Daddy about it. It's unnecessary." Voland nodded peacefully. Why offend such a kind aunt? When Voland returned home, the first thing he did was to tell his father about the walk. Edward couldn't believe his eyes when he looked at his joyful son. He hadn't seen Voland this happy in a long time. "Stacy, you're magic. I don't know what I would do without you," Edward said with feeling. Stacy looked at the nurse with hatred. If she had her way, that girl would be out of their house in no time. And this wasn't a house. Woland would have gone to a boarding school for children with disabilities. He's so proud of his master's praise. Stacy's cheeks turned pink, and a slight smile played on her lips. Voland wanted to tell the story he had heard in the park, but then hesitated half a word, remembering his promise. Stacy's lips drew together in a solid line with anger. "Well, we'll see whose side it is," she said, a stray thought running through her head. Edward thanked his fiancée for dinner and went to his office. His competitors had been too active lately. Everything they did was in color, as if they knew all his moves ahead of time. But how is it possible? Is there a traitor in the ranks of the company's employees? And why not? You know, you have a lot of envious people. Everyone thinks you're lucky. You just got married, and your wife died right away. Forgive me for saying so, but there's no such thing as coincidence. It's like your son-in-law was waiting for him to show up so he could give his soul to God, Jonathan said. Edward always reacted violently to such statements. What are you doing? Are you out of your mind? I love Vivi, and I wasn't even thinking about her wealth. You may not believe me, but I was against the inheritance in the first place. I would have left it to Voland or some distant relative. Jonathan only shook his head and grinned. Oh, come on, don't be such a Robin Hood either. He didn't want money. Who doesn't think about money nowadays, especially the kind that falls from the sky right into your hands? Edward almost punched his companion in the face that time. He's not a nice guy, Jonathan. Only money, money, and more money, as if there was nothing else in life but money. Stacy, on the other hand, was thinking about something else. How could she help Voland get out of his wheelchair? How could she get the boy to stop focusing on his illness? What if she tried it like this? Okay, that's tomorrow. Today didn't seem likely to work. I'll get up early in the morning. I'll get it right before Voland wakes up, Stacy whispered with a smile and went to bed. She liked living with Edward's family, especially if she ignored the negativity of her landlady. Stacy could understand it, though. The businessman's fiancée was afraid that the nurse might come to the forefront and overshadow her, the prissy prima donna. But Stacy looked at it with unconcealed irony. How could she possibly compete with Stacy? It's ridiculous. A woman who had lost everything in her life and a hottie who spent her time in beauty parlors and restaurants. The next morning, Stacy got up before everyone else and quietly slipped out of the house. She headed for a place to buy a puppy, a stray. Of course, Stacy knew there was a small, spontaneous market near the train station where retired grandmothers sold herbs from their gardens. Craftsmen were selling products of their talent, and artists were selling all sorts of junk to the suffering. In the midst of this motley mass stood a man with a huge cardboard TV box. The bottom of the box was lined with a soft cloth to make the puppy sitting there more comfortable. The idea was that for a price, anyone could bring a puppy and leave it with the vendor. Situations could be very different. For example, a person found a foundling among garbage cans but could not take it home. What do you know? Maybe the living space does not allow it, or he is allergic to animals, but the puppy needs to be adopted. You can't just leave him starving on the street. A shelter is a good thing, but it's not a rubber band either. There's not enough room for everyone. That's why there was a little man with a box at the market. He takes the puppies and then sells them to anyone who wants them for a symbolic 5 cents. And the demand is there because the puppies are always fed clean and clean. How can you pass by such little puppies? Of course, even for the symbolic price of selling puppies, the peddler was in a constant loss. But the emotions of being able to place a baby in a new family did not compare to the temporary inconvenience and expense of keeping foster pets. Seeing this, the man smiled happily. Oh, Stacy's here, he said. Oh, come on, come on. It's nothing. What do you care about Stacy? That's all in the past. I'm just Stacy now, the woman replied. Emmett nodded in agreement, but still remarked, You'll always be Stacy to me, an ambulance station paramedic. If it weren't for that unfortunate incident, you and I would still be on call today. Stacy frowned. Not bringing up the past isn't necessary at all. I remember everything perfectly well as it is. I mean, you were the best orderly on my shift, and what happened back then was my fault, and no one else's. I got you fired, and you warned me. You saw the driver of that foreign car dying, and I went in anyway. I gave him a shot, and the patient was allergic to the drug. He was doomed anyway. That's what the board proved. After the autopsy, they found a lot of alcohol in that businessman's blood. Thank God no one was hurt. Emmett turned pale and clenched his fists painfully. What do you mean no one was hurt? What about you and me? We got kicked out with a wolf's license. We had to stop practicing medicine. It was a high-profile case. The father of the victim was a big shot, so they put us on trial. They wanted to charge us with criminal negligence. And what was the negligence? That the poor guy had half a minute to live. We took a chance and tried to save him. Thanks to the judge and the lawyer, he was a good one. We avoided a felony. Stacy looked into the former orderly's eyes and saw tears in them. Oh, Emmett, you're worthless, she said quietly. She thought sadly, but did not pursue the unpleasant topic further. All right, enough already. We've talked about it 100 times. I'm sick of it myself. I'm actually here on business. I'd like more, Oberyn. The former orderly raised an eyebrow in surprise. Is that what I thought it was? Can I congratulate you, Stacy? No, the woman smiled. I got pregnant after all these events, and I can't have any more children. That's why my husband left me. He went to a young woman, filed for divorce. He's got the house for himself. I have nothing left. Anyway, I'm homeless now. But it doesn't matter. Show me the puppy. Emmett sighed heavily and began to show his former colleague the babies he had in stock today. After a moment's hesitation, Stacy decided on a snow-white pup with black ears and tail. Looking at him, it looked like someone had intentionally painted over those body parts to make adjustments to his appearance. Good choice. But I warn you at once, he will grow up big. He has in his relatives either a Labrador or an Alibi. So take that into account, Emmett said. See how big his foot is? Only giants have those. Stacy smiled and gave her former co-worker everything she had in her pocket. Emmett tried to refuse and return the money, but it was all in vain. Goodbye. I'll drop by again. I'm sorry I'm late for work. The nurse is looking after the boy, but not for long. Emmett looked at his former boss and turned his attention back to the babies in the box. When Stacy entered the room with a white puppy in her arms, Voland's joy knew no bounds. Wow, what a handsome boy. Can we call him Snowball? Stacy smilingly handed the baby to Voland. Of course you can. Especially since he's as white as snow. But you brought a dog into the house. You should at least ask before you make such decisions. Is he even vaccinated? What if he's got fleas or shingles or rabies? What then? Stacy came into the living room. Oh, come on. He's a normal puppy. A friend of mine gave him to me. He is mostly mongrels, but they're all vaccinated. He brings the vet in once a week, said Stacy. Look, this is a real game changer. A mongrel, and he's vaccinated. It's like nothing I've ever seen in the house before, Stacy exclaimed. Edward came into the living room, as Edward was getting ready for work. What's all the commotion? We must have a new tenant. What's his name? Snowball. Daddy, can I keep it? Voland begged. Father smiled. Oh, you can, my friend, no problem. Why not? I even like the name, and the dog's a good dog. When Stacy heard his answer, she almost choked with anger. But she didn't resist. She went to her room. Voldemort put the baby on his lap and rode him around the room in his stroller. Stacy looked at Edward with a smile, and he nodded approvingly. In his opinion, the nurse was definitely doing a solid A, maybe even an A+. On the way to work, Edward thought about the situation in his office. The thing was, he had made a very serious and reliably legal enemy. For the same reason, most of the deals he had made had failed, but the worst of it was that the information about future contracts was stored in Edward's personal safe, the same one that had been robbed not too long ago. Of course, the lock on the safe had been replaced with a newer and better one, but the fact remained. The information on his latest deal could have been leaked by someone either in the household or very close to him. But who? Could it have been Stacy? And how? How could she have gotten the code to the safe? Edward's mood dropped noticeably. There was obviously something wrong with this nurse. Why wouldn't she tell me anything about her past? What if she was the mole? The timing and her strange behavior all matched. At that moment, a very interesting thought occurred to Edward. What if he installed hidden surveillance cameras in the house, but only secretly, so that no one would know about them, not even Woland? No, he is not a mole, of course, but because of his age, he can easily give away everything he knows. The businessman liked the idea so much that instead of the office, he went to a large electronics store. The salesman patiently listened to him and then pointed to one of the models. Here, pay attention to this model. On the plus side, it has a fairly long battery life. The recording itself can be streamed in real time directly to your phone. Storage to Penelope by choice, you can upload to the internet, and you can upload to an internal drive. Installation is very simple, does not require any special skills for installation at all. Edward smiled contentedly. Oh, that suits me just fine. But I'd like to keep this purchase a secret. The salesman nodded understandingly, not forgetting to mention that their firm practiced complete confidentiality. It took Edward about an hour to install the cameras. The businessman was lucky, because that was when Voland had gone for a walk with Stacy and the puppy to the city park, and Stacy had already been in the beauty parlor for the last hour to get even more effect from her unruly curls. Well, let's see what kind of fish I've got in my net, Edward thought with a smile. In case the cameras didn't work, he intended to install them in the office for the same purpose as at home. The wait was about 3 days. At first, there was nothing interesting on the tapes. The tenants behaved in the same way as before. Life went on as before. No special secrets or unexplored discoveries. But what Edward saw on the tape of the third day shocked him. He could not believe his eyes. The surprise was so intense that he was speechless for a while. The fact was that his son Voland, left at home alone, had been walking quietly about the rooms. So his traveling in a wheelchair was a deception. Unable to contain his emotions, Edward headed for his son's room. Seeing Stacy there with the puppy, he motioned for the nurse to come out. "Dad, why are you doing this?" "Don't send Stacy away. I'm only going to talk to her," the boy begged, pale as a sheet. His father looked at the nurse and waved his hand. "Fine, let her stay. I have no secrets from her. Especially not a secret that it's you that's keeping us." Wolin looked fearfully at Stacy, but she smiled and shifted her gaze to Edward. "I apologize for switching to you again, but I have a rough guess at what this conversation is about." "And what do you think it's about?" Edward asked ironically. Stacy deliberately paused for a moment, then said, "It's going to be about the fact that your son isn't sick at all and has been moving around like a healthy man for the past 6 months. "And how do you know that?" "It's not like I've told anyone about it," Volan exclaimed. Stacy smiled. "I noticed it from the house slippers, buddy. Whenever there were no adults in the house, they somehow changed their position." Volan sighed sadly, and after some hesitation rose from his wheelchair, taking a few steps around the room. Edward watched his son without looking away, still not believing what was happening. Finally, realizing that all this was indeed reality and not a dream, he still asked Volan, "Why? What's the point? This has all been going on for months now." Stacy immediately touched his shoulder, hinting that the child needed to be spoken to more gently. Tears ran down Volan's cheeks. "This is all because of Stacy. Dad, you've been paying so much attention to her lately that if I even got out of the stroller, you'd completely forget about me. I really couldn't walk at first. And then when I got better, I started pretending. So you'd take care of me like you used to." Edward's heart trembled. Hugging his son, he lifted him easily into his arms and spun him around the room. Stacy stood back and smiled. She had discovered Volan's deception almost immediately, but she wouldn't reveal the little boy's secret. Let him decide when it was better to come out of the shadows and appear before everyone in a new image. "But then who was examining the documents in my safe?" Edward asked anxiously. Stacy shrugged her shoulders in confusion. Volan, on the other hand, had his suspicions. "Dad, it's Stacy. One day, when she thought everyone was asleep, I snuck into your office. The light was on, but you weren't at your desk." "And what happened next?" Father asked eagerly. Volan hesitated for a moment and then, gathering his wits, said Stacy was in the study. She opened the safe somehow. She was also talking to some man on a video link. "What was his name?" "Hector. Gosh, some really weird name there. I can't remember. Maybe Jonathan." "Are you sure of your own guess?" Edward asked. "Ah, that's right. Jonathan. Jonathan for sure." Edward sank down in his chair with a groan. "What is this?" "There are traitors everywhere. Stacy, Jonathan. But what could possibly connect them?" That same day, Edward gave his fiancée a thorough interrogation. At first she'd refused, made a surprised face. But when Wolin rode into the room in a wheelchair and rose from it in a spectacular manner, she gave up and waved her hand. "It's all your late father-in-law's fault. Edward, Ben actually happens to be my biological father. For a while in his turbulent youth, he lived on 2 families, and as a result, he had 2 daughters, one legitimate, Vivi, and the other like me, a gray mouse born into a sinful relationship. When my father died, not a muscle in my face quivered. 2 years earlier, I had buried my mother. She had drunk herself to death because of that lustful bugger, but justice was served. I've waited all these years for a reason. Vivi, my sister, went to the grave right after her father. I was getting ready to gather documents to prove my kinship when I found out that that fool had bequeathed all the money from the Semyonov family to you, to that fool Yemela from the village." Edward's cheeks flared, but he held back. Stacy continued, "You've been sitting on the stove for years, and you would have been for years if it hadn't been for that fool. You should have left everything to your husband. You're a country bumpkin. Look at you. You stink of dung a mile away." "Stop hurting my father, you bastard," Volan couldn't help himself. And Stacy spoke up, No. I told Jonathan to come up with something original. He's a fool. He's trying to ruin you, because Edward's inheritance was a windfall. He took it by surprise. You should share it. It was his men who robbed you 2 years ago. You don't believe me? How do you think they got a detailed plan of the rooms in the house? They took a lot of money, but you got out of it. You got the insurance. You're lucky." Edward. Stacy snarled and headed for the exit. No one was going to stop her. What was the point? There was nothing to convict her of anyway. There was no evidence on hand, and a little boy's words were not going to stick. Edward sighed and walked over to Penelope and Boland, then hugged them both. Birds were singing to the businessman's heart that he had identified as enemies, and the black streak in his life was finally coming to an end. It was all the fault of money and envy. Jonathan was detained the very next day. Out of resentment and deep disappointment in her hapless lover, Stacy promised to testify against him. Edward had a new life, and Penelope took a special place in it. However, she was not a housewife for long, and with the support of her husband opened a shelter for homeless animals. Victor became the manager of the shelter. Now people brought puppies not to the market, but directly to the shelter, where there were all the conditions for their living. They gave the puppies into good hands. Victor, as he used to do, asked for a penny for food, but not for profit, but for the memory of the past, when he used this change, along with part of his earnings, to buy food and medicines for the babies. As Victor had promised, Snowball eventually grew to the size of a calf and could easily knock a grown man off his feet. Olin went to school and brings home only good grades. At the same time, he calls Penelope mom and stands up for her. He also brags to his friends that soon he will have a brother. Whether this is true or not, it is difficult to say, but judging by the noticeably rounded tummy Penelope, the words of the boy is not meaningless. Kate stared at the curves of the ornamentation on the wallpaper. The wall clock was ticking away, beating the beat of the unrestrained rushing forward of life, which did not take into account the opinion of such insignificant grains of sand as some Kate Simons, a 32-year-old housewife. This very life hummed with the flow of rushing cars on the highway, the noise of thick foliage, shouted with the voices of children in the yard, howled with the neighbor's dog, and rattled some dishes in the kitchen of the neighbors from the fourth apartment. And inside Kate was quiet and empty. There were no thoughts, no feelings. It was as if her blood had stopped flowing through her veins. "Mom, are you here?" came the voice of her 11-year-old daughter, Emily. Kate shuddered. "Daughter, are you home yet? I didn't hear you come in." "Yeah, I just got in. Have you been to the hospital yet?" Kate nodded. "What's up? What's the news?" The girl was worried. Damien said that there was no point in hoping. The metastases have started to grow. I don't think Dad's going to regain consciousness. If we bring him out from under anesthesia, he may suffer from pain shock. I don't know what to do, my daughter. Damien hinted today that we should consider taking him off life support. You mean there's no chance at all? Emily had tears in her eyes. But it can't be like that, Mom. Today's medicine has advanced. They literally bring people back from the dead. Kate hugged her daughter. The doctors say there's no point in hoping for a miracle. When they take Daddy off the equipment, he'll come to his senses. But I'm so afraid he's going to be in this horrible pain, and no one knows how long he'll be able to take it all. The medications are failing, even the powerful ones. And tell me, the girl asked, why Daddy? He has always been so healthy in sports, not even smoked. It does not happen that cancer so suddenly attacks, and literally in a couple of months wipes a man off the face of the earth. And in general, it is written everywhere that cancer is now successfully treated. Why don't we have it? And they know the good stuff. I never thought I'd have to go through this. When Vince went to the hospital, it didn't look that bad. And the prognosis was very favorable. It's progressed so fast, no one expected it. And the therapies were optimized. It was just one organ failure after another. I can't explain it to you because even the doctors can't explain it. They did everything they could. And my dad was like, it was like someone had cursed us. You can't say that. I don't know what to think anymore. Cursed. Emily was worried. Do you believe that? I don't know what to believe anymore. I even thought about going to a psychic. My grandmother persuades me. She found some man who says he can help me. And I'll tell you a secret. I've already made an appointment with him. Are you serious? Mom, I know you're desperate, but I think this is all a hoax. Baby, I'm jumping at any chance I can. Don't go to him. He's just a money grabber. You're smart. I know how they profit from people's gullibility and grief. I'll just go, my daughter. If he pulls money out of me, I'll just turn around. That's your business, of course. But Grandma's out of her mind. She's fine, she believes in all this, she's forgivable. But you're an engineer, a man with a technical degree. How could you even allow this to happen? There's a lot we don't know about life, Emily. For instance, you're only 11 years old. You talk like an adult. Why is that? Well, you and Dad should be thankful you taught me everything from an early age. And kids today are basically growing up early. It's not mystical, but to get involved with a charlatan, it's stupid and reckless. Better still to look for doctors, suddenly just are such. Emily looked seriously at her mother. Vince is in the best clinic. They're world-class specialists. I don't think there's anyone more competent. That's a good point. I don't know, if you realize all this, how you could have gone to some witch doctor and been persuaded by your grandmother. Okay, let's change the subject. I can't bear to think about it myself. All right, but promise me you won't pay that man. I promise. Her mother smiled weakly. Listen, I haven't cooked anything today. Why don't we order something? Mom, we're really tight on money. Let me cook something myself, Emily smiled. You go get some rest. You're my good girl, Kate hugged her tightly. Don't try too hard. I have no appetite at all. By the way, there were dumplings in the freezer, we can boil them. Dumplings will ruin our stomachs. We just ate them yesterday. Isn't dough and meat healthy enough? That's when you make it yourself, Emily objected. They don't even know what's in the store. No, I'll make something normal. At least fry some potatoes. There's chicken in there too. Okay, sweetie, all right, I'm gonna go to bed. Kate lay down on the couch. It was a shame that her daughter had to do all the work in the kitchen, but at the same time she was glad that the girl was growing up independent and collected. Since morning, Kate, without saying anything to her daughter, headed to the meeting with the psychic. She warned at work that she would be late. She lied about going to see her husband in the hospital. At work, everyone sincerely sympathized with her, because Kate was always a favorite in the team, and co-workers were pained to empathize with her grief. Contrary to expectations, the sorcerer lived not in some abandoned house, but in an ordinary standard apartment in the bedroom district of the city. Kate dialed a number on the intercom panel, and almost immediately a voice invited her in. She took the elevator to the 8th floor. A man of indeterminate age, dressed in a coffee-colored house suit, was waiting for her on the landing. He looked quite handsome, and did not fit the usual idea of people dressed in long black coats. Hello, Kate. Nice to meet you, the man smiled. My name is Eden. Let's get acquainted. Please come in. He led Kate inside his apartment. The room was spacious and bright. There were no bundles of herbs hanging anywhere, no chicken feet in jars. Just an ordinary city apartment, quite modern and comfortable. I can see your surprise, Eden smiled. Did you expect to find some medieval alchemists dwelling here? To be honest, yes, Kate smiled embarrassedly. I'm skeptical. I'm a civil engineer. I don't believe in any of this stuff. You don't have to believe in anything. To each his own. I've been blessed by a higher power to see things that most people can't. They gave you the talent to design buildings and structures that I can't. That makes sense, Kate nodded. So you won't look into the crystal ball? God forbid. Only charlatans do that. I work with energy, not sorcery. You believe in energy, don't you? Energy? Kate frowned. Yeah, electromagnetism, kinetic, potential. Of course, the laws of physics have been around since high school. There, that's right. But modern physics has only explored a fraction of what's in our universe. And energy isn't just limited to the known types. For example, what do you think the soul is? A soul? Kate wondered. Well, they say it's what makes us human. They say that's right. But what do you think? I'm not interested in the religious aspect now. The soul is a kind of driving force that's hidden inside us, Kate began. Oh, I see what you're getting at. So the soul is also energy. How could it not be? We can't see it, but we feel it, just like any other energy. And our thoughts are nothing but energy. Yes, the human body is completely subject to the laws of physics, chemistry, and biology. But at the heart of it all is energy. You've heard of the aura, the energy shell of a person? Everyone has one. And there have been enough researches on this subject. There are devices that not only detect the presence of biofield, but can also control it. There are people, to whom I belong, who can control it. I have been practicing for over 30 years. Once I was, like you, an ardent skeptic. I didn't believe in anything but physics. I worked, by the way, at a nuclear power plant. And after 40, an event happened that turned my world upside down forever. Pardon my tactlessness, Kate interrupted. How old are you? 75, Eden smiled. No way. The woman gasped. You look about 40 years old. Yes, I know. It just so happens that I was fixed in that shape when it all happened. I was 43 when we had the accident at the reactor. There was almost no chance of fixing anything back then. No one wanted a repeat of the Chernobyl disaster. Especially the memory of it was still fresh. And when the worst was only a couple of seconds away, I suddenly did something that I still can't explain. And even then... What was it? Kate froze. I thought, or rather imagined, the explosion first. What would happen next? The full scale of the disaster. It was just like a movie in front of me, and then I rewound everything in reverse, and was able to rewind to the moment when a mistake was made that could have caused all this. We had an inexperienced employee who started working at that time. We were on the night shift with him. He fell asleep and missed the moment when the reactor started to overheat. And it just so happened that I replayed the whole thing back to that moment in time when the kid had just closed his eyes. I don't know how I figured it out, but I realized that this was the moment when the future depended on me. I ran to the operator's room and the kid was just starting to doze off. I looked at the instruments, the indicators were going up, but I pushed him out of the way. We reacted quickly, called the right people, and all this was successfully prevented. So you're saying you traveled back in time? No, I'm afraid no one can do that. That's not what happened. It was like I was in a prolonged déjà vu, as if anticipating all the events that would follow, and it all happened at the moment I went to sleep. It had been a busy day. I violated my job description, I repent. If I had fallen asleep, disaster would have struck. I fell asleep. But it was at that moment that I had a vision that enabled me to save everyone. I realize that sounds implausible, especially since you won't find any information about that incident anywhere. Nothing actually happened. But since then I began to actively study information that could somehow explain my suddenly discovered psychic abilities. After that incident, strange things began to happen. I began to see a lot of things ahead of time and far from being a dream. It was like sudden shifts of consciousness. I was afraid, I didn't know what to do about it. And later I found a man who explained it all to me. I will not burden you with details, and you will not believe me anyway, but since then I decided to devote my life to it. I lived in India for a long time, mastering energy practices. My education as a physicist was a bit of a hindrance. But then I began to connect what I knew with what I had yet to learn. And now I can look into both the future and the past. Don't think of me as a wizard. There are many things I can't and shouldn't influence. But thanks to my gift, I can now help people. The most important thing I realized is that our universe is completely subject to the laws of energy. And if someone manages to tune in to the right frequency, a lot of things open up. I don't think of myself as God or anything like that. As a transmitter, I just catch signals from the information field and broadcast them to those who address me. Let's say I believe that Kate frowned skeptically. It's still beyond me, though. My mom recommended him to me. I'm going through a very difficult situation in my life. I just don't know what to do or what to expect. Tell me, don't be afraid. It's between you and me. If I can do anything to help, I will, Eden said. Only. Kate was embarrassed. Money. Sad Eden grinned. Yes, it's a sensitive issue, the woman nodded. My daughter let me go to you on the condition that I didn't pay anything. There are a lot of crooks, and they all want to get into your pocket. We're in a very difficult position now, and... Keith put his hand on her shoulder, and the woman immediately felt relieved. I don't charge for my services. Any remuneration is entirely your decision. I believe that the gift given to me belongs to everyone. If I took something from my work, I would live now in a luxurious mansion, not in this typical 2-bedroom. Yes, perhaps it's unreasonable. But I made my decision at the time, and I'm not going to change it. But then how do you earn money? What do you live on? I write term papers for students. Eden laughed. You wouldn't believe it, but it's a decent income. And I have to justify my education somehow. That's it, Kate said. Well, let's try it. Anyway, 6 months ago, my husband Vincent suddenly felt ill. It was sudden. I was at home at the time. He just blacked out. He was dizzy. Vince is young, always been in excellent health. You can imagine how scared I was. I called an ambulance. My husband didn't regain consciousness, so they took him to the hospital. And then they found out he had cancer, liver cancer. And Vince doesn't drink any of that stuff. And it's almost undetectable in the early stages. Everything was going so well. The doctors got right to work on my husband. The tests were pretty promising. They promised us that there was a cure for it now. For almost 6 months. Everything was on the mend. But suddenly Vince started to get worse. He was urgently hospitalized, and after examination it was found that the tumor was progressing and metastasis was actively developing. All nearby organs were already affected. Neither chemotherapy nor radiation therapy helped. Now Vince is barely conscious. He's been heavily sedated with painkillers. He's in an induced coma. He's hooked up to a ventilator and some other devices. I don't understand anything anymore. I can only see my beloved husband fading away. The doctor hints that it's time to stop all this. There's no hope, but I can't. I just can't. We have a daughter, Emily, who loves her father to bits. It's a lot harder on her than it is on me. I just can't imagine what would happen if Vince was gone. So I take it the official medical profession doesn't understand why the disease is progressing so rapidly. Eden frowned. Show me a picture of your husband. Kate opened the photo on her phone and held it out to the psychic. Eden looked at the photo for a long time without hesitation, then closed his eyes and remained silent for several minutes. Kate didn't dare to ask anything. It was obvious that the man had fallen into some sort of trance. Finally, he opened his eyes and exhaled noisily. Only then did Kate realize that he hadn't been breathing all this time. It had been at least 10 minutes. Well? She asked impatiently. I'll tell it like it is. I don't want to get your hopes up. There's no way to save Vincent, but... Kate objected. There's nothing to be done. The fact is, your husband was exposed to an outside influence. That's what caused his illness. When he was on the mend, the influence was repeated and much stronger. And then the disease began to progress rapidly. What do you mean? Kate's eyes widened. What effect? Is it some kind of spell or curse? A lot of people call it that. But I prefer to call it an influence. But who? Who would do something like this? I was on good terms with everyone. He had no enemies. I see that person. Eden nodded. 2 of them, actually. The first is a woman in her 40s. Blonde, rather full and short. Wears long fingernails with a brightly colored manicure. Lots of rings. Always wearing glasses. This woman only thinks about money. Already went through a divorce over it, but she's not settling down. She's in Vincent's inner circle and she was physically abusive. The damage was done through liquids. The second person is a fairly young male. Slim, a bit of a slouch. There's a scar on his face near his lip. The slave is under the influence of this woman, also close to Vincent, practicing some kind of ritual. He's got a powerful energy, but it's completely negative. Simply put, the woman is using him to destroy Vincent. Also, the worst part is that it's probably some relatives. Kate turned pale. Eden, you are now describing Vince's older sister, Darcy, and his half-brother Eugene. Oh my God, how? How did you see that? Is this really all of them? But why? Why would they torment their own brother? A mercantile interest. What kind of interest? Vince has always helped them out with money. Especially after Darcy's divorce. She was left with nothing. Her husband took all the assets. The baby stayed with him. I mean, she's not the nicest woman, but she can't treat him like that. He was basically supporting her. And Eugene, he's always adored Vince. Eugene is under Darcy's influence. It's like she's zombifying him. I can see it's like he's in a kind of a cloud over his mind. I mean, he doesn't even know what he's doing. If you'd come to me sooner, we could have gotten this thing off. But now. Maybe we should try it, Kate whispered. Somehow she trusted Eden. I could do a cleanse, but it would only ease Vincent's suffering and give him a few weeks at most. The effects are very strong, and it's already at a stage where you can't get rid of it. It's one thing for the soul to be affected, the energy. It's another for the body to be almost destroyed. I'll do anything. I just want Vince to regain consciousness, to suffer less. I can't let him go without saying goodbye. All right, Eden nodded. I'll do my best, but be prepared for the worst. No matter how hard I look at it, I don't see a favorable outcome. What will be required of me? I need direct contact with your husband. Can that be arranged? Yes, we can go to his hospital today. I'll introduce you as a relative. He's alone in his room, so no one will interfere with the visit. We can go right away. I don't want to waste time. We don't have much time. Yes, of course. Then I'll get changed. Eden left the room, leaving Kate alone with her thoughts. It didn't occur to her that any of this could be true. Why? Why are they doing this? The woman resented it to herself. Vince did everything for them. What good is his death? I've always suspected Darcy was dirty, but not like this. And they're smiling sweetly. And they're not shy about asking for help. What kind of people are they? They're family. My parents and Vince were all over Eugene like crazy. Got him into university. Got him an apartment. Darcy didn't seem to care about his little brothers. Wouldn't even let her see her son. And when things started to fall apart, she came running. I don't know why my mom didn't tell me to go see this man sooner. Who am I kidding? I would have made her laugh. Lord, give me strength. That's it. I'm ready. Eden returned to the room he had changed into a summer suit and looked very presentable. The doctors won't think I'm a sorcerer, will they? Or they'll put us in the hospital together. No, Kate replied. Don't worry. When I come to Vince's room, no one comes in, so we're not disturbed. Great, the psychic nodded. Then let's go. The bright July sun shone through the translucent curtain that covered the hospital room window. Kate shuddered at the sight of her husband entangled in tubes and IVs. She didn't recognize the man she'd lived with for so many years. Instead of a healthy face, she saw something white and gray with huge dark circles under his eyelids. Vincent had lost a lot of weight. His cheekbones were tightly covered with thin, almost transparent skin. Kate took his hand gently. The fingers were dry and cool, as if there was no life left in them at all. Eden stood modestly at the entrance, hesitant to disturb the couple's moment of rendezvous. He was holding a small leather bag in his hands. Eden, come here, Kate called out to him. The man obeyed and sat down in the chair. Vince had been like this for almost a month. May I? The psychic looked at her questioningly. Kate nodded. Eden gently took Vincent's hand. He sat with his eyes closed for a few minutes. Then he stood up abruptly and reached for his bag. He rummaged through it a little and pulled out a small bag of salt and a black candle. Now, I'm going to ask you to step outside, Kate. We can't have anyone present. If anyone tries to enter the room for 15 minutes, distract them, okay? Yeah, I will. What are you going to do? I'm going to take a sample of Vincent's energy with this salt and use the candle to relieve the pressure on him. I'll do the main work at home, but I couldn't do it without personal contact. Understood. The woman nodded and slipped out the door. Kate sat on a small couch in the hallway. None of the staff was in sight. The minutes dragged on unbearably long. Suddenly, a nurse came running out from around the corner, heading toward Vincent's room. Kate was worried. Oh, you can't go in there, she blurted out, blocking the nurse's path. Why would you do that? The woman was stunned, fiddling with her IV. I need to administer medicine to your husband. It's already time. You see, Kate laughed. He's got a... Well, his uncle came from Seattle, especially by train. He hadn't seen Vince in 10 years. To be continued. So he came to say goodbye. I even went out and left them alone. I don't want to intrude. My uncle's very upset. They were close before. Just 10 minutes. He'll be out soon. 10 minutes? The nurse looked at her watch. Okay, but don't tell Damien. He'll scold me. We still have a little time to spare. Let your uncle stay with his nephew, but I'll be there in exactly 10 minutes. All right. All right, Kate nodded. When the nurse entered the next room, the woman exhaled. The last thing she needed was for the nursing staff to see her wife's desperation to bring witches into the hospital. Eden looked out of the room. Kate, I'm done. I'll continue at home. Thank you, Kate smiled weakly. At that moment, the nurse reappeared. Well, Uncle, did you have a chat with your relative? She winked. Now let me take care of him. Kate and Eden left the hospital. They said goodbye, and the woman drove to work. The rest of the day passed in gloomy reflections. Things were not going well, and the supervisor delicately escorted Kate home. At 12 noon on Saturday, Kate shuddered at the ringing of the phone. The sound was so intense and disturbing that the woman immediately felt anxious. Hello, she answered excitedly. Kate, good afternoon. The voice belonged to Damien. Can you come over now? Yes, of course. Is something wrong? The anxiety in her chest was growing. Yeah, but don't worry. Vincent's awake. We're shutting down the equipment now. Oh God, yes, of course, I'll be right there. Kate started packing in a hurry. The chances of Vincent waking up on his own were practically nil. The only explanation for what had happened was Eden's purge. Emily. She shouted to her daughter. Hurry up, Daddy's awake. Really? Her daughter froze with her mouth open on the doorstep. Why are you standing there? Come on, hurry up. Yes, Mommy, of course, yes, I'm ready. I won't even change. 25 minutes later, they were both in the hospital lobby. The elevator stubbornly refused to come to the first floor, riding somewhere between the third and sixth. What's the matter? Kate was indignant. One doesn't work, the other is busy. Let's take the stairs. She grabbed Emily's hand and dragged her up the stairs one flight at a time. Damien was waiting for them outside Vincent's room. Hello, ladies, he smiled softly. Okay, now, no panic and no unnecessary emotion. Vincent had regained consciousness, of course, but he was very weak. The nurse injected him with an anesthetic, but surprisingly, he said he didn't feel a thing. Thank you, Damien, Kate cried. Mom, what are you doing? Her daughter stroked her arm. Does that mean everything's okay? Let's not rush things, the doctor interrupted her. We can't explain how it happened, but his condition is still very serious. Kate and Emily entered the room. At first glance, nothing had changed. But then the woman noticed that there were practically no tubes on her husband's face. Vincent was breathing on his own. Hearing the footsteps, the man opened his eyes and, looking closely, smiled weakly. The smile was kind of creepy, but to Kate it was the dearest and warmest. Vincent. She rushed to him. Hello, Emily exclaimed. My girls, Vincent said hoarsely. I thought I'd never see you again. Hush, hush, darling, Kate cried. You'd better not talk yet. Your ligaments are weak. We were as soon as the doctor called. Oh my God. Mommy, it's okay. It's okay, Emily said. Have some water. They tried to talk for a while, but Vincent was weak, and the women were in a semi-hysterical state. Suddenly, Vincent squeezed Kate's hand, looked at his daughter. I have something important to tell my mom. Give us a few minutes. Dad, are you serious? The girl was indignant. We're a family. We can't have secrets. Okay, I'm kidding, of course. I understand that you two want to be alone. I'm going to go get a candy bar from the machine. Emily left the room. As soon as the door closed behind her, Vincent squeezed Kate's hands tightly, painfully. Vince, be careful. You can't strain yourself, the woman tried to loosen her grip. Kate, listen to me carefully. We don't have much time. His voice was suddenly more confident and firm. Even the wheeze was almost gone. But it was his eyes that frightened Kate the most. They were darker and glittered unnaturally. Everything would be all right now, wouldn't it? No, Kate, you mustn't delude yourself. It will be all right, but at your place. My journey is at an end. Don't say that, Kate exclaimed. Kate, don't interrupt me, please. We have very little time. I don't know how much more time I have. I saw something. I don't know how to explain it. I was in total darkness. Then there was a light and some man in a suit, and he was kind of pulling me towards him, talking to me. I can't explain how it all happened. Like a dream. I know I wasn't asleep. And then I saw Darcy. She was binding me for some reason. Eugene was there too. They were taking me apart like a building block. And that man told me later that they made me sick, and I believed it. You don't have to believe it. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that I know, but it doesn't matter. They can hurt you and Emily too. Vince, why? Why is this happening? Because of the apartment. What, the apartment? What the hell is this? Look, I didn't tell you. But you know I got the apartment where we live from my grandfather. Eugene, he's no one Darcy's related to. And he wrote a will leaving everything to me and Darcy. They had a very bad relationship. She couldn't get over the fact that she didn't get anything. And then I did something stupid. You and I hadn't even met yet. I made a will for her. Why? Kate was outraged. It's long and hard to explain. I didn't think I'd have a family and all that. Besides, I love my sister myself. She's a complicated woman, you know. We agreed then with her more in jest so that she just calmed down and not to spoil the relationship. And I wrote that if I died, the apartment would go to her. That was almost 14 years ago. Then she got married, and it was all forgotten. And I didn't even remember, especially since I had you. But then something happened. I don't know what happened to Darcy or how she got the idea that I should be killed. I kind of tried to be as supportive as I could. What else was there to do? I can't believe she'd destroy a loved one over some square footage. I realized that the apartment has gone up in value. Grandfather was not a poor man. He got this apartment from the factory. A boss, after all, and the apartment is corresponding. Now sell it, you can buy a couple of new buildings. There will still be some left. She must have gotten greedy. Someone put her up to it. And Eugene was under her influence too. I mean, he's had a knack for it since he was a kid. Mama even took him to some witches in the middle of nowhere. Neither Dad nor I took it seriously. But Darcy was interested. I once caught them making some kind of dolls. Dad burned it all down, scared and strictly forbade such obscurantism. He was a believer, so it was all forgotten. Darcy suddenly decided it was time to bring Eugene out of the shadows. I don't know what she did to him, how she talked him into it, but they started doing it. There's no other explanation. And you know, I saw it all, how they did it and what they did. He was in some cemetery or something. I don't know what he was doing. And then I saw my sister's face, and she was looking at me like that. And I woke up. I know I don't have much time left, and I have to stop their plan. But that's not all. Now I have a feeling she's going to come after you too, to eliminate all the competition. A notary is on his way. I'll sign over the apartment to you, then the will be annulled. I've got to get there in time. Otherwise she'll just kick you out on the street. We have to keep you safe. That man in my vision, he can help, but I don't know where to find him. I do, Kate said quietly. What? How? How can you know him? Vincent wondered. I'm the one who went to him. I went to him. I know it's crazy, but my mom insisted. I was so desperate, realizing I was losing you. So I contacted this man. His name is Eden. He's a visionary. The funny thing is, he's a physicist. I trusted him. He told me all this stuff about your sister. You know, I don't believe in all that magic and stuff. I'm a pragmatic man, but Eden convinced me somehow. And he's the reason you woke up. He cleaned you, said there wasn't much hope. But yes, my girl, there's no saving me. Right now, you and Emily need to take care of yourselves. Meet with this Eden. He'll tell you what to do. Vincent sighed. I love you so much. I don't want you to leave, Kate cried. Maybe. I'll always be with you. I know now that everything doesn't end with death. There are things we don't know about, but I'll always be with you, even if it's my soul and not my body, but it doesn't matter. Vincent grimaced in pain. "Honey, are you sick?" Kate was frightened. "It's okay. It'll go away. Get the doctor." Kate scurried out of the room in search of the nurses. Damien, seeing her worried face, rushed into the room. Kate sat with Emily on a couch in the hallway. Soon the notary arrived. He stayed in Vincent's room for quite a while. When he came out, Kate was allowed to come in. Her husband lay still. A nurse had just given him an IV. When Vincent saw Kate with Emily, he smiled weakly, but said nothing more. It was a nasty, cold rain. Kate, silently swallowing her tears, watched the clods of damp earth fall onto the lid of the lacquered dark brown coffin with a thud. She herself approached the grave last, holding the pale Emily's hand tightly with half-paralyzed fingers. She scooped up a handful of earth and spread her palm over the grave. Emily did the same. Kate couldn't remember the rest of it, how the grave was closed, how the wreaths were placed, how someone came up to her and offered condolences. The wake, the people. Kate couldn't sit through the rest of the wake. Her mother, an energetic woman named Camelia, had taken it upon herself to make the arrangements and escorted her daughter and granddaughter out, putting them in a cab. Kate was grateful to her. Daughter Camelia said, "Are you leaving?" "I've got the place all to myself, especially since there aren't that many people. I'll come and see you later. It's best if you just go to bed. We've got to get through this. Here's some sedatives. Take a couple pills and go to sleep. And I was going to ask you, it's none of my business, but I didn't see Darcy and Eugene at the funeral. Are they out of town, or did something happen? I mean, what could be wrong with a dead brother?" "I don't know." Kate shuddered. "I tried calling Laurel, but she wouldn't pick up. I even went to her house, but no one would open the door. I couldn't find Eugene either. It was unclear where they'd disappeared to or if they even knew Vincent was dead. I haven't been able to get in touch with them for days. I thought they'd hear from the hospital or someone they knew. I don't know where they are. Fact, they're Vince's closest family. Even his aunt's here, and they haven't seen each other in 5 years. And these guys aren't here. I don't know, Mom, what happened. You can't do that. Anyway, you and I need to talk about Darcy and Eugene later. I have some not-so-pleasant information. I got it from Eden, by the way." "Eden." Camelia's eyes lit up immediately. "So you went to see him?" "It wasn't easy. Okay, I'll tell you all about it later. Here comes the cab." "All right, daughter, rest up. Don't forget to take your pills. I'll be there tonight. I have the keys." "Okay." Mommy Kate hugged her mother tightly. Camelia was fussing in the kitchen when Kate woke up. Lara managed to calm herself down and the girl fell asleep after taking a couple of sleeping pills. But Kate herself slept restlessly. She dreamt of Vincent, at a funeral, some kind of commotion at the hospital, and for some reason her grandfather, whom Kate had never seen, but knew it was him. "Did you get any sleep?" Camelia looked at Kate worriedly. "You should go away somewhere for a while she's still on vacation. A change of scenery will do her good, and it'll be easier for you to get over your grief." "Easier?" Kate nodded. "You know, we'd taken it all in while Vince was still in a coma. But when he came to, there was some hope. I realize now that those half hours were like a last-ditch effort to talk to us. I'm glad we made it. Otherwise, I'd have spent the rest of my life cursing myself for not saying goodbye to my husband." "Come on, girl. He'll always be with you." "That's what he said," Camelia said softly. "Mom, about Eden. I want to tell you everything that happened." Kate talked at length about how she'd decided to go to the psychic, what he'd told her, how he'd appeared to Vincent and managed to bring him to consciousness. "You see, I told you I had to go to him right away. He was recommended to me by people I trust, and they're not going to lie. Eden helped them out a lot back in the day. It's a shame it didn't happen sooner. It would have saved Vince's life. But you can't undo what you've done. His relatives are a nightmare. How could they do something like this? And there's no way to punish them for it. Eden said that karma always catches up with people who do negative things. God will punish them or energy according to the law of balance. How much evil was done will come back. But the law would punish them. What law do you want? Will be laughed at. There's no proof anymore. That's true. You know what I'm afraid of now? I told you Darcy wouldn't stop there and want to hurt Emily and me. I want to talk to Eden about how to keep myself safe. Do you think she'll do it? In Vincent's case, she had a vested interest. The apartment's yours. You said he had it notarized and signed over to you, and that the old will was annulled. She must realize that in case of your death, God forbid, she won't get anything anyway. She's not your relative. She won't inherit anything. And she knows she'll never get anything. I don't think so. I mean, he didn't even get a chance to say all that. Not even about his death. She probably doesn't know. I think she knows everything. Eugene must realize that his rituals worked, though I have no idea how it all works. But still, even if she knows and she's waiting, it's not your fault. Her plan is to kick you out, to nullify you. If I've got it right. I don't know, Kate shrugged. I can't go to her and ask her directly. I'll try to find out through Eden. The next day, Kate invited the psychic to her house. Emily opened the door. Hello, the girl looked at the guest carefully. And I imagined you differently. You look like an ordinary person. Come in, your mom is waiting for you. Hello, Emily. I didn't picture you that way either, to be honest. My idea of an 11-year-old girl is something with bows and dolls. You're out of touch, Emily smiled slightly. And when was that at 11? Already the personality is fully formed. By the way, I'm already writing programs and developing applications. They even want to buy one. Wow, Eden whistled. That's a serious girl. You are certainly far from it. Math isn't magic, but I don't believe in it. Even though you convince Mom. I think it's just a coincidence that Dad came to his senses. You're wrong to think I don't know anything about math, Emily. Mom probably didn't tell you, but I used to be a lead engineer at a nuclear power plant. Physics and math are my cousins, you could say. Come on, the girl was surprised. But then how did it happen that the physicist went into pseudoscience? What is not proven, yet cannot be considered a lie. Moreover, I'm not a wizard or a sorcerer. I'm just getting in touch with our Earth field. What's physics to you? And all my predictions are pure mathematical analysis, only transferred to the probabilities of events. There's nothing supernatural about it. It's up to you, whether you believe it or not. Now, I need to talk to your mom about something. You know, I think I'll accept that you don't have to cheat, especially if you don't ask for money. That's just weird to me. Nowadays, no one will even take a free spit. Money isn't everything, Emily. As cliché as it sounds, my gift was not given to me for profit. That's what I went to college for. And what I was given from above, I have no right to demand compensation for it. Interesting, Emily thought. Well, I won't keep you. Go to your mother. She's in the kitchen. Eden walked in that direction. Kate was setting the table. Hello, Eden. Have you had lunch? Emily and I did a little work. The stove smells really good. I'd like that. Well then, please have a seat at the table. We'll talk afterward. You can start telling me, if you don't mind. I don't like to eat in silence. I don't feel comfortable making small talk, given the circumstances. Yes, of course, Kate smiled. Anyway, here's the situation. Before Vince died, he told me he'd been talking to you in Australia. That's not an island. Don't be confused, Eden corrected her. In your reality, anyway. And there he saw that Darcy was intent on hurting Emily and me in some way. I don't know if you're aware of the will or not, but Vince managed to get me the apartment that Darcy's claiming. That's the apartment, he nodded toward Eden. Yeah, my husband inherited it from his grandfather. He'd foolishly made a will for his sister to make up for her resentment. Now that will has been revoked, and Darcy doesn't know she's out of the woods yet. But I'm still afraid she'll either retaliate or try to kill us all to get her way and end up the sole heiress. Well, that woman is capable of anything. You were right to tell me. I can't neutralize her completely, especially without personal contact, and she's not working on her own. We need to stop Eugene. From what I understand, they're both missing. Didn't even go to the funeral. Yeah, I got a feeling they're up to something. I know I'm just making a fool of myself, but I just can't shake the feeling of danger. Kate, I can put a protection on you and your daughter, It'll work as a shield against their attacks. Technically, it's like a cocoon of dense energy. You won't feel its presence in any way. The only thing is, when I put it on, you have to free your mind completely, so I can get to your energy points and fix it all. You won't be a problem. Emily, on the other hand, is skeptical. It could get in the way. Talk to your daughter. I can't build this protective cocoon without her consent. Yeah, sure, when can we start? Right now. Right now. Then let's get Emily together and explain it to her. I think it'll be easier that way. You see, I haven't told her about Laurel. I don't know how she's going to react. She has a hard time believing things like that. We'll try to convince her. Eden smiled. Emily, Kate shouted. Come here. What is it? The girl's worried face appeared in the doorway. Emily, sweetheart, there's something we need to talk about, her mother called affectionately. Emily sat down in the chair with her arms crossed over her chest. Baby, I know what I'm about to tell you is going to make you angry. But as a sign of respect and love for me, and in memory of Daddy, please take what I'm about to say seriously. Okay, I'll try, wrinkled her nose, replied the girl. In general, the situation that happened to Dad is the work of your Aunt Camellia. She applied a magical influence on him, which caused the disease. The reason is money, or rather our apartment. Dad made a will for it once. So she decided to take drastic measures. She doesn't know that he signed it over to you and me. But Dad warned her before he died that you and I were in danger. This woman won't stop and she might take revenge. Really? The girl was horrified. I always hated her. A nasty woman. And Daddy was always helping. I knew she was doing something. Emily burst into tears. Kate didn't see that coming. Mom, the girl exclaimed. So it's all true? Is Auntie a witch? No, dear, Aunt Camellia is not a witch. But your Uncle Eugene has certain powers, and she took advantage of them. Uncle Eugene, too? But that's impossible. He loved Daddy so much, and he's a good man. Emily, Eden intervened. There are people like that. They're really good, and they don't want to hurt anyone. But they're easily influenced. Your uncle is a master manipulator, using his abilities for evil. He's under hypnosis, so there's no point in blaming him. But I'd be careful of your aunt. She wants to take us out, too, Emily said, horrified. It's hard to tell. I can't judge her intentions. Eden shook his head. I'm not omnipotent, and I can't see it from a distance. I need to get in touch with her personally to understand her intentions. I don't want her to come here. She won't, her mother reassured her. Both Darcy and Eugene have disappeared. You probably noticed they weren't even at the funeral. Maybe they had already punished themselves and crashed their car. Emily suggested. Don't say that, Kate said sternly. Whatever kind of people they are, wishing bad things on someone won't fix them. Their fate will catch up with them. But for now, we have to do everything we can to keep them out of harm's way. Is there anything we can do? Is it serious? Emily, look what she and Daddy did. And Auntie smiled so calmly, knowing it was her fault he was dying. I can protect you, Eden said. I will put a shield on you and Mama that Darcy cannot penetrate. But you must believe it with all your heart. Accept it. Otherwise it won't work. Emily, you said you're into programming. Well, what I'm doing with your energy is a kind of programming. I'm recording your basic attitudes. And the defense is like an antivirus. It will catch all of your aunt's attacks, either erase them, quarantine them, or send them back. And then, when it's over, I'll clean it up. I understand, the girl nodded. Then I suggest we start now, or we may lose time, which will be to our own detriment. Who knows if Darcy has already started something? For the next 2 hours, Eden conducted his manipulations. Kate and Emily were only required to sit and sink into a certain state. When everything was completed, the man woke them up. That's it. My work is done. You may not be afraid now. But as soon as Darcy starts to show himself, let me know. Thank you, Eden. Kate smiled at him. I trust you, and I sincerely hope this all helps. Maybe I should pay you after all. Kate, you've already paid your way. I haven't had such a good meal in years. Eden smiled and headed out. After he left, mother and daughter talked for a long time, discussing what had happened. A little less than a month had passed since the funeral. Slowly, Kate was getting used to the idea that Vincent was gone. She remembered his words that he would always be there, even though he was gone, and that made it easier. Emily was slowly coming to her senses, too. It was still 2 weeks before the beginning of the school year, and the girl was already preparing for school, wandered with her grandmother to the stores in search of beautiful notebooks. Even had time to meet a few friends who had returned from vacation, communication with whom had been in recent months overshadowed by her father's illness. Emily returned from her grandmother's that afternoon in high spirits. She bragged to her mother about the new tracksuit Camellia had bought her. Trying it on in front of the mirror, the girl fidgeted, trying to examine herself from every angle. Suddenly, she turned dramatically pale. This did not escape her mother's attention. "Emily, what's wrong?" Kate was worried. "I feel dizzy," she said, holding her temples. "It's very stuffy. It's the last of the hot days, and I'm in a suit like this." "Let me pour us some lemonade," the mother suggested. "Take off your beauty and come to the kitchen. We'll sit on the balcony, at least get some fresh air. The weather's really nice." Kate went into the kitchen, took glasses out of the cupboard and a pitcher of lemonade from the refrigerator, which she had been preparing since morning. She threw a couple of ice cubes in each glass, poured the drink, and took it out onto the balcony, setting it on the table. She herself sat down in a chair and relaxed, exposing her face to the warm August sun. This is about to be over soon, she thought. Yes, it's been a hard time. How are we going to be without Vincent? It's easy for prices to rise so fast, and we'll soon be short of money. Although Emily says she'll soon be earning her own money with her apps. I've heard that this field really pays, and even talented teenagers are actively recruited. But still, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a hobby. I have to do something about my job. There's no way I'm selling this apartment. Everything here reminds me of him. How can I honor his memory, even if there's no money at all? Okay, my mom won't let me go to waste, but I have nothing to do in my research institute. Should I talk about a promotion? That's where James is going to retire. How long has he been training me for this job? Can I handle that kind of responsibility? Who knows? You never know until you try. Where's Emily stuck? The lemonade's about to heat up. "Emily," Kate yelled. "Where are you?" The ice had already melted. Her daughter didn't answer. Kate felt a tingle in her chest. She jumped off the balcony, remembering how pale her daughter had turned during the costume fitting. Emily was lying by the mirror, still wearing the suit. Kate rushed to her daughter and jerked her hand away sharply when she touched her. The girl was unconscious and hot as a radiator. "Oh my God, Emily, Emily, wake up!" Kate patted her daughter's cheeks. She only made quiet noises. The mother immediately called an ambulance and ran to the kitchen for a compress. The cold brought the girl to her senses a little. She opened her eyes and mumbled something, but Kate couldn't make out the words. She carried the girl to the bed and pulled off her Olympics. Emily was all red. Sweat was dripping down her back. The team arrived quickly. The doctor gave Emily an antipyretic shot, and she came to within a couple minutes. "Mommy," she mumbled. "It's okay." Honey, Kate stroked her damp hair. "God, I was so scared. You probably just overheated." The doctor frowned. "Let's go to the hospital." "No, please. Not the hospital," Emily pleaded. Kate realized that hospitals were a painful association for her daughter, so she looked at the doctor questioningly. "You can sign a waiver of hospitalization. I'll prescribe medication just in case your fever starts to rise again, but if it gets above 39, call us right away." "Okay. I understand," Kate nodded. The temperature had risen again, but not above the threshold the doctor had indicated. And Kate wasn't in a hurry to call an ambulance just yet. Emily lay in bed, taking the prescribed pills. Her mother changed her compresses every 10 minutes. "It's the air conditioning," she shook her head. "Yesterday we sat under it. My runny nose is getting worse. And you, look, you're not feeling well at all." "It'll pass. Just get some sleep." My head hurts so bad, Emily said quietly. I had the same thing when I had the flu last year, but that was in the winter. Don't worry, it's not the flu. It's just a cold. That's what's coming out. The medicine will help. The doorbell rang. Who is it? This late? Kate looked at her watch, surprised. It was a little after 9 p.m. Maybe it's Grandma? Emily looked questioningly at her mother. She shouldn't. She has her keys. She wouldn't call. Okay, you lie down, rest, I'll go and see who's there. Kate left her daughter's bedroom and headed for the front door. She looked through the peephole and recoiled. On the other side stood Darcy and Eugene. After hesitating briefly, Kate took a deep breath and opened the door. Kate, what are you doing? We thought no one was home, Darcy said with a wave of her hands. Where have you been? Kate snapped at her. Did you know that Vincent was gone? I've been looking for you for a month. No one knows anything at all. The phones have been disconnected. Kate, I can explain. Darcy shoved her shoulder away from her and went inside. She was followed by a silent Eugene. The man looked like her shadow. Kate felt uneasy. She didn't want to let anyone in, but she just couldn't resist this woman's pressure. Darcy walked hostess-like into the living room, sinking noisily onto the couch. Eugene stood beside her, staring down at the floor. I'll be right there, Kate said with a twinkle in her eye. Emily wasn't feeling well. She thought Darcy gave a satisfied hum. When Kate heard that information, she went into her daughter's bedroom and told her not to get out of bed under any circumstances. Vincent's sister and brother are there, she whispered. I'm going to call Eden now. I'm afraid to be alone with them. But I'm even more afraid for you, my girl. I can't let that woman see you in such a vulnerable state, in case she takes advantage of you. Kate typed a message and sent it. She explained that she had unwanted guests over. Eden responded immediately, telling them to stay put for now and promising to come as soon as possible. Kate replied affirmatively and left her daughter's room. Isn't Emily coming out to say hello? We haven't seen her in a while, Darcy said ominously. Emily's not feeling well. Some other time, Kate said sharply. Why don't you tell me what's going on? Where did you disappear to? We didn't disappear, Darcy laughed. We were at home. Weren't we, Eugene? The man nodded silently. Kate was taken aback. What do you mean, home? Then why didn't you answer? Why didn't you come to the funeral? Your own brother was dead, and you were just sitting at home. Darcy, are you out of your mind? I am, the woman said with a predatory smile. Don't you think it's our business whether we attend the funeral or not? It's your business to get your things and leave this apartment with your sick daughter. That's it, Kate thought. God, I can't wait for Eden to get here. I'm scared to be around that woman. Kate pretended to be surprised. Why would I leave my apartment? With this, Darcy held out a thin folder containing some documents. Kate ran her eyes over the papers and calmly placed the folder on the table. First of all, she began coldly, realizing that this was her moment of triumph. As far as I know, will take effect 6 months after death. So your claim cannot be honored for another 5 months. Emily and I are registered here and have the right to live here until you are officially the owner of the apartment. You're reacting strangely, Darcy tensed. So it doesn't surprise you that I brought you a will and that you're basically losing your house. Okay, let's say you're right legally. It's okay, I'll wait. Although, well, if there was a first, there will be a second. Secondly, Kate continued coldly, not reacting to Darcy's words. This piece of paper has been invalid for over a month. Before you come in here and wave it in my face, you might want to find out who is now the official owner of the property. What are you talking about? Darcy jumped up from the couch. Why would the will be invalid? Vincent hasn't regained consciousness in months. I checked back in June. Third, Kate interrupted her rant. Vincent has been conscious. If you'd been more interested in how he was doing in the hospital, you would have known that. And that's when the notary visited him and the will was rewritten. So you have no right to be here now or in 5 months. Kate rose from her chair and pointed her hand toward the door. Oh yes, forth she grinned. I know everything. I know that my husband's death was your doing. I can't prove it, but I don't need to. Karma will catch up with you without me. You bastards, taking your own brother to his grave for the sake of some brick walls. Darcy turned pale, red spots appearing on her face. That's it. You were right, Eugene. That woman suspected something. It's a good thing we had insurance for that. What are you pale about this time? Kate asked. I'll leave my condition right now. We go to the notary and you make a gift deed to me. Yeah, I'll just tie my shoelaces, Kate grinned. Well, that's up to you, Darcy rolled her eyes. Eugene, come on. The man pulled a pouch from his pocket and put his hand into it. Almost immediately, loud noises came from Emily's room. Kate jerked toward the door. Don't hurry, Darcy grabbed her arm. Woman, you can't help her anyway. If you resist, Emily will burn from the inside out. You say you know what we're capable of. My favorite niece is in Eugene's hands right now. So come on, get ready. Let's go to the notary now. You can sign a waiver, a power of attorney, whatever. But you'll give me the apartment, understand? Otherwise you'll lose your daughter. Nobody's going to lose anybody, came Eden's voice. Who the hell are you? Darcy looked at him angrily. He's the one who's going to make you pay for Daddy's death. Emily looked out from behind Eden's back. What's going on? Eugene, why isn't it working? Darcy exclaimed. Eugene put his hand back into the bag, and Emily made a long sound. Kate flinched, but immediately heard her daughter laugh. You'll never make it, Emily shouted. The aunts have the wrong people. Mom, chase them away. They can't hurt us anymore. But Kate was embarrassed. Get out of the apartment. I'm going to call the police. You'll have to explain to them how you came to be carrying human remains, Eden said menacingly. What? What human remains? Kate looked at him in confusion. And buried in cemeteries. Keep in mind, you could be looking at an article. So I'm asking you nicely, please go away. You'll be sorry, Laurel hissed, heading for the exit. Eugene obediently followed. You won't, Eden laughed in his face. When will you get your payback? Do you think you can control people's fates with impunity? I've seen how it ends for you. So go, you'll soon find out for yourself. When the uninvited guests left the apartment, and Kate locked the door behind them, she demanded an explanation. I arrived almost immediately. Don't ask me how I got here so quickly. You won't believe me, Eden smiled. He ruffled Emily's hair. I was lucky you didn't lock the door. I walked in and heard part of your conversation. I felt their energy right away and headed toward Emily. Still, the girl didn't believe us completely. They managed to partially penetrate my shield. It's a good thing you called, or it would have been a disaster. But I've taken it down, and they'll never bother you again. But how can I be sure of that? Kate asked. Darcy looked very angry, and she would find a way to get her way. She wouldn't. Why not? Kate frowned. You'll find out for yourself tomorrow, Eden grinned enigmatically. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to sleep. I'm going home. I need to recover from all this hard work. It was a pleasure to meet you, even under these circumstances. Goodbye. Eden nodded and left the apartment. Amanda was experiencing the very real state of dread of a clean slate, even though she was neither a writer nor a journalist. Tomorrow, she was starting a new life and a new job with accommodation. The employer is a wealthy, powerful businessman who clearly doesn't know his capital account. Without further ado, he made his conditions to her over the phone. I need a carer with a degree in psychotherapy to be near my daughter 24/0 hours a day. I have a comfortable country house with excellent living conditions. You will be completely comfortable, but for the 3 months of your probationary period, you will not get a single day off. A generous salary will compensate you for this temporary inconvenience. And the man, who called himself Carl, quoted her fee so much that Amanda's legs gave out. Her monthly income would be the equivalent of her hospital salary for the year with all bonuses and fringe benefits. They agreed that she would start her duties in 3 days. During this time, she would gather all the personal belongings she needed and select the necessary medical devices for the patient's sessions. She will then be authorized to make a list of anything else she may need in her work. A car will pick you up at your front door at 800 hours sharp. The driver's name is Andrew. Send me your home address to this number. Carl pronounced the words sharply and clearly as if he were minting coins. Amanda even thought that every minute of this man, apparently, is worth both silver and gold. Too businesslike. But it even appealed to her. She didn't respect the soreness and gruel in his speeches. She judged people by their actions, not by their sweet voice. She knew in her 26 years that time puts everything in its place and stigmatizes characters. Who's worth what? Here she is, Amanda herself, a psychotherapist with a red diploma, the beauty and pride of the faculty, the hope of the department. At school, all lightweight and character girlfriends on discos and bars in high school fluttered. She crammed a place in the medical university on the budget, partially guaranteed only a gold medal. The support should have been passed on excellent final exams. There was no money for a serious education in the family of Max, a plumber, and his wife, Idaka, who worked in a bakery as a saleswoman. No, her parents were not some marginalized individuals. Father even drank. Only on holidays, did not complain of this bad habit, and with men colleagues, every paycheck did not cheat. He came from a remote, abandoned village and ended up in the city when clever businessmen bought out all the agriculture in his small homeland for the farming kingdom. A kind of holding there now appeared with dairy and meat processing plant of a new format with technological lines of the most innovative kind. Max was called to work there, but he held a grudge against the new owners, that they almost uprooted the pogost on the outskirts, where his and his wife Ida's parents were buried, that the village was torn down to nothing, turned into ashes, ruins, an archaeological monument of their former life inwardly. He knew it was just as well. The population in their village was finally getting drunk. There was no work. Everyone was leaving for the city in droves. Only he and Ida held on to their hut and 10 acres of land, but then they gave up too. Amandochka was 14 years old at that time. That's how she became a city girl. With the proceeds from the sale of land and house, they bought a 2-room flat in the city. The 5-story red brick building was strong. It would stand for a long time. Max was taken to the factory with open arms. The salary was small, but their family made ends meet. Ida quickly made friends with the women neighbors. They told her there was room in the bakery. The old saleswoman had just taken a well-deserved holiday. Working, Ida was well received, not offended. Happiness ended overnight. Max came to pick up his wife from the bakery in an old car. Clumsy bread van in the courtyard, clumsily turned around, crushed under himself a kopeck, not even immediately noticing what happened. Fortunes of the driver and passenger died on the spot. Amanda's urban life began with orphanhood. Amanda used to rush to school like a prodigy, always loved to learn, books about relationships between people so in general swallowed overnight. So she was interested in who and how of the heroes will act when he tail-nailed, in a stalemate plunged into a stalemate, with all the guts in front of the choice put in the orphanage, where she got after the tragedy, at first snickered, but then sublimated on the study, not to think, not to remember, untimely departed loved ones. 6 months later, her foster parents took her under guardianship, but warm, cordial relations with them were not born. She moved to them in 2 rooms and a communal room, still not an orphanage, where everyone dreamed of a family and parents even at a young age, but she dreamed of growing up and living alone. Naive, touching young lady Amanda tried to assess the behavior of people, to guess who and how they would show themselves, taking into account their temperament and character, a kind of homegrown psychologist. And even more, she liked to think about the fact that a person can be broken, to change the line of his behavior, to convince. In the 10th grade, Amanda disappeared in the scientific library, where she read Freud, Jung, Bandura, Halperin, Bekarev. Her classmates did not know the names of such names, and she melted and molted from her new discoveries. Her gold medal at school suffered, sitting days and nights on her heels over textbooks. Her merits did not include gifts, offerings to teachers. There was no one to pay. Talented student high marks were given sincerely and generously. Her peers did not persecute the crazy girl. They had long since given up on her eccentricities, although there were good reasons to pay more attention to her. Amanda was ravishingly beautiful, possessing that very feminine magic when men turn into slaves, Admirers barely having seen such a rare specimen of external perfection. Her hair, the color of ripe wheat, fell in waves down her smooth back. Green eyes with dark pupils beckoned to drown in their depths. Lush forms gave birth to a halo of sensuality. Graceful wrists and ankles hinted at blue blood, charm, aristocratism. Refined nature had not rested on her appearance. Only Amanda herself did not seem to notice any of this, persistently gnawed the granite of science, and ignored the languid glances of representatives of the stronger sex of all ages. After receiving a certificate of secondary education orphan, and even a medalist in the medical university took pity. Dramatic life at the girl, you can make an exception on the budget place to look for a place. She passed the entrance exam on excellent without tutors and material investments. She returned to her flat, left after the death of her parents. Private property, nothing can be done or taken away. She dressed unfashionably, modestly. Not as a garden scarecrow, of course, adhered to strict classics, a little leveling her natural charm. She didn't notice men around her from the word at all. She was so keen on Mrs. Psychology, but one day she fell for a seasoned catcher. Mason was also good-looking, ironic, daring, and unpredictable. With this Amanda managed to she fell head over heels in love. She responded enthusiastically to the offer to drop by for a glass of wine, knowing perfectly well what would follow, except the guy had a nasty little soul. Amanda laid in bed on a bet with a guy from the majors who was courting the girl, but got a turnaround, told a fellow student. "Son, don't sit on the crate. I'll take this girl down without a hitch." He grinned, and then you'll follow the beaten track. Got it. Rip. Don't teach a scientist. The golden child of an important daddy. If you get her to be easy for me, I'll slip you 100 grand. So Mason worked his arse off. Amanda figured out the catch the next time they met after their wild night. Her hot bayo looked like an ice cube. She didn't faint. She wrote off her fascination with the smarmy Mason as hormones. Only the fee to the self-confident, handsome man did not get. Amanda made far-reaching conclusions for herself, and now she wouldn't let male representatives within a kilometer of her. Coffee with cakes in the nearest cafe between couples was always welcome. Going to the cinema for the premiere as a group. Why not? The rest of the attempts in her address, reminiscent of courtship, suppressed at the root. Around the crowd of those wishing only hoped in vain, all awaited a complete refusal. Trouble for the young doctor after completing the theoretical course of classes did not end there. Place and residency, received deservedly in a prestigious psychotherapeutic hospital, they greedily caught every word of her new idol, the head of the Department of Rehabilitation after serious cognitive disorders. He taught the resident a lot, eagerly listening to his recommendations. He handled difficult patients, then helped her with a referral to another prestigious place. And there the persecution from the male community continued. The first swallow, or rather a persistent eagle guest, was one of the doctors with professional weight in the clinic. He did not go round and round. He called the young specialist to his office. "We need to have dinner with you today to discuss the prospects of your work in our institution. Warn me at home that you won't come for the night." He told her directly, without any offense, straight to the forehead, that her career was only through his bed. He abruptly and without regret refused the invitation, for which she soon paid the price. It turned out that before her appearance in this institution with sedatives under strict control, everything was clear. Then she showed up, and expensive pills started going missing in packs. Her involvement or non-involvement in the thefts was not investigated. They quickly pointed at the door, threatening proceedings with a subsequent wolf ticket and blacklisting in the profession. The next incident occurred at the specialized ambulance station where she got a job. The brigades had a narrow focus: to take them out of a hangover, to deal with aggressive behavior that led to a fight, injury to loved ones in a state of temporary effect. Their patients were people on the brink, balancing between the diagnosis of incompetent and incapacitated, living between bouts of mental illness and remission. Why weren't they isolated from society? There were plenty of reasons. Somewhere relatives ransomed the blood babies, and somewhere the border guards themselves were able to prey with the help of money and connections from suspicions of abnormality. Amanda had never realized there were such medical services in their city. She'd been brought here by the same call from a faculty member who'd patronized her during her residency. Trips to the inadequates, as her team called them, were over in a month. That time she was on the same team as the head of their office. He also sometimes took part in psychological raids, saying that he hadn't been to the circus for a long time and wanted to have fun. Amanda was disgusted by his cynicism, but had no choice. After a fairly quiet shift, the supervisor volunteered to give her a lift home. The institution was located outside the city. The first bus was still an hour away. Everyone was tired after a sleepless night. On her own head, the young woman agreed. But the chief didn't go to the city, but drove her to the nearest woods. Bali, I don't like ceremonies. He breathed in her face with his breath. He wasn't afraid of anything. When already in the car, he drank half of a flat glass flask of cognac. Amanda immediately wanted to leave the car, but he only laughed. I have half of the city receive certificates of sanity in the right cases. I'm not afraid of neither the authorities nor the traffic police. She herself could not explain later where the strength came from to slap him hard. The man's head jerked. He looked at his colleague in surprise. Not cooperative, you say? Well, go fish out of here. The field to the city 11 kilometers. While you walk, you will air your brains in the cold. There's no place in my team for a naughty girl. Ask any of our female employees. Now get out. Amanda didn't ask anyone. The next shift, she wrote a letter of resignation, and that was that. Out of practice again, out of work again. She stayed home for a month and a half. None of the clinics did not want to take her even to the place of a nurse. Glimmers of her unreliability filled the medical world, and it was up to everyone to interpret them. Amanda's psychotherapist, advanced in matters of different types of aggression, was well aware of such a Western phenomenon as harassment. But the woman had never imagined that she herself would become its victim. She did not yet know how the owner of a bright female beauty to put up barriers against vile molestations, rudely violating her personal space. This was something she would have to think hard about in the future. A late call from Carl the day before had interrupted a long string of bad luck. She wouldn't just go for the job, she'd crawl into it if she had to. Why was she so scared and excited at the same time? She couldn't explain it herself. What will the coming day bring me? She hummed for some reason, in a bass voice, and then asked further, will I fall pierced by an arrow? Then she would laugh loudly to drive the nasty fear further inwards. The job was ambiguous. A carer for a girl with a fatal blood disorder and Asperger's. The notorious syndrome was unfamiliar to ordinary people far removed from medical terms. In a nutshell, its effect on patients could be characterized as inability, impossibility, or inclination to communicate with the outside world. Existence in their own narrow world into which strangers were rarely allowed. In society, such people are called autistic. The anamnesis of Amanda's future ward was aggravated by a serious blood disease, autoimmune in nature. Inside the unfortunate victim, some cells kept proving to others that they were the main ones, destroying the body tissues caught on the warpath. The patient's condition was now rated medium severity. Protracted remission gave her father a chance to be near his favorite girl longer. But how long the insidious disease will behave decently, knew, in all probability, only the Almighty in heaven. The doctors only parted their hands. May and see, Carl, we are doing everything we can, but only a miracle can help the girl. You and I live in the real world, with its cruel laws of Mother Nature, ruling over all living beings on the planet. I've heard it all 1,000 times, replied the inconsolable father. What's your advice? How can I brighten her life if she does not react to any unconcerned, inactive, quieted, and silent? I've never seen if she can smile. For 16 years of constant uncertainty, it can drive you crazy. The renowned autism spectrum disorder specialist sitting in the chair across from Carl thought for a few seconds. Then, I have one doctor with a not-so-successful professional path. Doesn't get along for long in any treatment facility. And I can't get from her the reasons for these constant fiascos. She was one of the most intelligent students on my course, gave great hopes, burning desire to benefit disadvantaged people, followed all the methods and innovations in our field, and in clinics deflated like a balloon. Unfortunately, I cannot patronize every brilliant student of mine. Made a couple of patronages for her, but it didn't work out. She and I recently met by chance at a cake shop where I was buying a cake for my wife's birthday. Exchanged contacts in case I had information again about vacancies somewhere in our sponsored hospitals. I invite this girl. She did her residency at my hospital, and I can vouch for her almost as much as I can. Carl weighed the pros and cons and decided that he had nothing to lose. The old carers couldn't cope with Elizabeth. so maybe this young girl could do something. There were quite a few residents in his large house. His favorite cook, Vanessa, who had been with him for 30 years, her son Ashley, the gardener and Vanessa's au pair, a maid with the exotic name of Gabriella. There's room for the unknown Amanda, with 4 guest rooms empty, or Gabby, as he called the maid to himself. I'll have to give her the order to do it. The ice of the experiment that would turn their lives around had broken. Amanda decided to start the radical changes in her life with her appearance. She needed to create a new working image that would hide her natural beauty as much as possible. She didn't want this heavenly gift, which she thought was unnecessary and undeserved, to interfere with her work again. The young woman's not-so-extensive wardrobe consisted of loose trousers, baggy skirts in dark colors, oversized jumpers, blouses, low-cut shoes, and boots. A couple of funny pajamas with Cheburashka and Gina and bunnies on the lawn on the prints. Amanda liked lingerie, lace, and silk, so no one would see it under her loose clothes. Her hair was a bit of a mess. They did not want to be braided into braids, which were destined to form a curl on her head. Relations of the image was completed by glasses with neutral glasses without dioptrias. She had bought them for a masquerade party at the university a long time ago. Now they came in handy again, were satisfied with the fitting. Amanda put her camouflage ammunition into a large bag and went to collect her specialized books with much more pleasure. While her patient was resting, she would read everything about autism in more detail. You don't just start treatment from scratch. You need a sober, rational approach to everything. At 800 this morning, as promised by Carl, Amanda's doorbell rang with a smiling guy. "Hi, I'm Andrew. Let me take your things to the car. The chief has asked you to check everything thoroughly for any forgotten items. You won't be able to leave for 3 months. Amanda felt so warm and relaxed by his words, she thought we'd work together. I'll do everything I can to make it work. The journey to her new home took just over 3 hours without traffic. The train station is 2 kilometers away. As if Andrew had read her mute question, there are 6 cars in the garage, 2 drivers. Anything that needs to be bought and brought in, you'll leave it to me. Amanda looked curiously around the majestic, but very pretty house of gentle sandy color with brown original elements of decor on the facade, balconies, a large terrace. The building stood surrounded by parkland, with a large outdoor swimming pool visible in the distance. Now covered with some kind of protective material, the smooth alleys were lined with neat clean tiles, a scattering of coniferous trees. One of the paths was framed with birch trees. The rose garden was wrapped in a film. On the other side of the house, there are some outbuildings resembling small greenhouses. Everywhere boxwood shrubbery, green even in this late autumn. Some exotic, with thick emerald-colored leaves. And all guard lined up on the porch. "Welcome to our home." These are the words of a tall, formidable woman with a mop of bright red hair. "My name is Vanessa. I'm the housekeeper, like Carlson's Friedenbach, and I'm also the cook." The woman smiled a wide, kind smile and held out a large, soft, warm palm to Amanda. "This fellow with the rake is my son, Ashley. He's a bit of a handyman out of boredom, but his favorite is the garden. It's his domain." And Vanessa continued, "Have you met Andrew? The other driver's name is William. The only one left is our maid Gabriella. Her mum's Spanish. That's where the name came from." Amanda was stared at with 2 large brown eyes by a young lady with a form that was overemphasized by her work clothes. Amanda only had time to think when a tall, elderly man with a noble appearance appeared on the doorstep. She would have addressed him as Your Majesty, or at least Your Graces or Your Lordship before. Gray, piercing eyes, a short hedgehog of gray hair, regal posture, broad shoulders, pleasant timbre of voice. "Amanda, I am Carl. Gabriella will show you to your room and give you a tour of the house and courtyard. Make yourself comfortable. Our Vanessa will bring the meal schedule to your attention. I expect you in my office in 2 hours for a chat. If it satisfies me, I'll introduce you to my daughter Elizabeth." He turned and disappeared into the house. Ashley picked up Amanda's luggage. Gabriella made an inviting gesture to follow her, and only Vanessa smiled reassuringly at her. "We have lunch at 2:00 p.m. Late arrivals will not be tolerated by the host. Then we'll get to know each other better. Now you have more important things to do without me." Amanda followed Gabriella through the house and hardly listened to the maid's peaceful mutterings. She was impressed by her room, with its separate bathroom and toilet, its huge windows overlooking the garden, its elegant yet homely atmosphere. She did not know yet how her life in this house would turn out, but she was already eager to make herself useful, and Amanda's relationship with her foster parents was normal. But whether it was modern trends that influenced them, or whether her interests were very different from those of the older generation, they rarely saw each other. Communication was reduced to routine phone calls like, "Hey, daughter, how are you? Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine with us too." As the dialogue usually ended, or was reduced to discussing another talk show on TV or gossip about the neighbors in the yard. It was stifling for Amanda in such a boring framework. To see each other was for her birthday, to drop by with presents before New Year's Eve. But to tell her father and mother how difficult and lonely it was for her in this world of people was out of the question. She's an adult, independent, a cutoff piece. She had not formed with her guardians in special soulful closeness, when one for all and all for one. The older generation did not understand her choice of profession, but moving to a flat, leaving on her own, approved. Adopted daughter stopped chasing them for the empty time spent near the TV in the arms of fried seeds, without attempts to develop intelligence. Different blood, different destinies, on different paths rushing. In this large, beautiful dwelling, Amanda felt in her gut some kind of unity between the household. She had not been here for half an hour yet, and she already wanted to stay for a long time. Tired of the long monologue, Gabriella led her to the door of Carl's study at the end of her tour of the building and garden, and "I don't like ceremonies and antimonies. We'll be rubbing our sides against each other all day long. Don't barge in on your master, knock first. He doesn't take kindly to familiarity." Amanda nodded, agreeing to the "you" and thanking her for the tips. Gabriella left, swaying her hips gently, and the therapist thought to herself, "There's a reason this nymph is trying so hard. Probably there's an object of her attention in the house, for the sake of which she is constantly in a state of combat readiness to beckon, to envelop with charms, to conquer the heart. Does she have her eye on the master? It's a good thing I took care of my modest appearance beforehand. I will not be so conspicuous to the domestic public as Gabriella deliberately does. They'll have to deal with that themselves. I have other tasks." Amanda knocked firmly on the study door and entered after a shout from her host. Yes, come in. I'm in my office." The office, though still an inexperienced practitioner, but a very strong theorist, liked it at first sight. Furniture made of noble wood, endless shelves with books, elegant statuettes, excellent landscapes and stylish frames on the walls. A desk with a large desktop computer, a music center with speakers in a corner, a separate cabinet with CDs. She didn't know Carl at all yet, but this office seemed to shout out loud, my owner is far from stupid, well-read and educated, intelligent and successful." Carl himself invited her to sit in the soft armchair by the coffee table, not telling her her subordinate place in the room, seating her at the desk opposite him. Ringing the bell, he summoned Gabriella. "Make us a couple of cups of coffee, please, or would you prefer juice or tea?" Amanda gratefully agreed to the coffee. She had been so nervous this morning that she hadn't even had breakfast at home, and now she was afraid that her traitorous stomach would give her away, rumbling loudly at the worst possible moment. Lucky for her, along with coffee, Gabriella had brought a vase of walnut biscuits, a box of chocolates, and a jug of cream. Amanda pounced on the treats like a hungry wolf, but she saw no judgment in Carl's eyes. He liked sincerity and directness in people, even smiled. "We're not welcoming you well. Your first day on the road. They didn't even offer you tea." Amanda tried to say with a full mouth that everything was fine, then smiled helplessly back, wiped the crumbs off her lips, and carefully finished the rest of the biscuits. "You'll have to forgive me. I was nervous, so I went for the sweets. Thanks for the coffee. Nay, let's get back to business." Carl would never admit to his partners or to this young woman that he likes to do his inspections the old-fashioned way. It was an approach he had borrowed from his father, a simple farmer who had spent his life cultivating the land and growing cereal crops. Now his father, unfortunately, was no longer able to work. 5 years ago, Carl had bought a house in the neighboring village where his parents were now living. The older generation flatly refused to move into Carl's mansion, arguing that the land in their vegetable garden was much closer and more interesting to them than the park landscapes of their son's estate. Having a kind-hearted housekeeper, the son stopped persuading them to live together. Now they only went to visit each other and to family holidays. But he remembered his father's instruction that any hired laborer should first be fed heartily, see how he copes with the meal, and then draw conclusions. If a person eats sincerely without greediness and false shyness, he will be good. But if he tells that he is not hungry, takes only a couple of crumbs from the table for decency, he will work so sluggishly. Any qualified recruiter would die with laughter from such a method of personnel selection. But Carl had long ago learnt from his own experience that the method works without fail. After handing Gabriella a tray with empty cups, Amanda's boss started the conversation. "Your candidacy was recommended to me by a professor who sometimes counsels my daughter. Before you begin your duties, I would like to briefly tell you our backstory. Not as a stranger to me yet, but as a therapist, Elizabeth, my wife, and I have a late baby. My spouse passed away a week after she was born. Heart failure. I have an older son, Harry. He lives and works in Europe, in our branch in Prague, and comes here occasionally. Harry was born when my wife and I were very young. Now he is 33 years old. Our student marriage, made by great mutual love, turned out to be very strong. We lived soul to soul, and only one thing upset my chosen one. After the birth of Harry, a series of miscarriages followed. Flesh else, my wife dreamed of a second child, a girl, even the name of her beforehand in honor of her mother, to whom my wife was infinitely attached. At the age of 44, my wife got pregnant once again, was infinitely happy, but the doctors grabbed their heads. Even the usual examination, which all expectant mothers undergo, revealed a serious arrhythmia. The heart could not cope with the double load. Problems with the work of blood vessels began. Doctors feared that the baby was not getting enough of the nutrients it needed. My wife, almost all the time lying in the clinic, only looked at me pleadingly and asked, "Don't let the doctors terminate this pregnancy. I will take care, fulfill all their appointments. I have to carry this baby to term." Her zeal increased even more after the ultrasound showed that she was carrying a girl. The wife became finally obsessed with the idea that it was heaven that finally took pity on us and was giving us this last chance. My wife bravely endured 9 months of agonizing waiting and an endless series of procedures and injections and surgical intervention in the form of a cesarean section. The neonatologist's verdict was a blow to her. They immediately began to suspect some abnormalities in the girl. A detailed examination showed that she inherited an extremely rare genetic blood disease transmitted through the female line. People with a do not live long, 10-15 years at most. The news broke the wife, shattered everything in her already sick heart. Arrhythmia attacks began to recur with wicked persistence. She never returned home from the hospital. Elizabeth was discharged after 2 months of scrupulous observation. At first, I was desperate, resentful of the little girl for taking away the woman I loved and leaving me alone in the... He was 17 at that time. I am still amazed that he was a wise adult even then, convinced me that everything was destined by fate, that he too had lost his mom. But it was her life, her dream and her choice. You won't believe it, but it was he who, together with the nanny, looked after the baby, quickly learned to change her nappies and feed her specialized formula. The second blow was that soon doctors noticed that Elizabeth was different, not like other children. Her genetic disorder had not yet manifested itself, but she drove us crazy by the fact that she did not react to our presence at 6 months, at 1 year, and then. Imagine the picture: the child eats, sleeps, but does not react to us, to a lot of colorful toys around him. The face is like a frozen mask, no vivid facial expressions, no gestures, as you sit or lay down in such a position and will freeze, sometimes for quite a long time. The girl turned out to be pretty, even pretty. Big-eyed, curls of blonde hair, chubby arms and legs, but she behaved like a puppet, like an artificial doll. After a while, she was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, or autism. Doctors assured her that this type of autism spectrum disorder boded well for her prospects. Body functions would be partially developed, but not fully developed. I took Elizabeth to Europe. There, the doctors were able to perform almost a miracle. They removed the sleep disorder, adapted her eating to the right regime, and taught her to react at least a little to what was going on. I came back from Germany almost happy. Elizabeth began to recognize her family, babbled something in a language we didn't know, sometimes tried to express something with gestures, but she still hadn't learned to smile. On the street, she turned around at the noise during walks on a trip to the Black Sea and pushed her legs up when Harry and I tried to bathe her in it. Later, I sent Harry to study in the UK, and as if as a reward for my troubles, my business grew and grew like on yeast, bringing me more and more income. We built this house together with my wife. It was her idea to live away from the hustle and bustle of the city, in the peaceful countryside. The man briefly interrupted his narrative. It was obvious that the story stirred up old memories in him. He looked at his watch, and then looked up a little. There are only 15 minutes left till lunch. The rest you will learn in the process of work. I'll just add the main thing. The autoimmune disease, like a hungry hydra on the hunt, reared its head sharply when Elizabeth entered puberty. Everything was always delayed compared to her peers. So it happened about 2 years ago. At her 14, those former merits of the medical profession began to fade quickly. It seemed that the destruction of cell tissue by her own internal aggressors was causing her brain activity to go to sleep. The few dozen words that she had previously spoken cheerfully were forgotten. She is once again indifferent to what is going on around her, happy to walk with Vanessa outdoors, even swimming in the pool with Ashley's help. The girl has forgotten all those skills. More and more often, she won't let herself get out of bed, now moves only in a wheelchair, eats almost nothing, loses weight. I realize, Amanda, that you're not a miracle worker or a god. The doctors have already told me that the girl has no more than a year to live. The deterioration of her fragile body is progressing. For myself, I have labeled your tasks as facilitating her departure to the next world. I know it's impossible, but I still dream of her smiling when she looks at our park, our home, the sky, and the sun. I guess I want too much from you. Amanda was in shock. No, not at the task set before her. Here she would do everything she could, apply all her knowledge. There was such pain and despair in the man's eyes. He spoke so courageously about his daughter's imminent departure from this world that the visiting therapist's blood ran cold. So much for the high fence, the rich house, and the walls of which for so many years trouble has lived at ease. Despite the pleasant faces of the people who built it, the lunch was gorgeous. Vanessa cooked so deliciously that Amanda didn't even notice that she ate all of it. She reached for some very unusual salad, and several people answered her mute question about where Elizabeth was. "Elizabeth is having lunch in her room," said Carl. "We'll go to meet her after dinner." "Mate," he says. "I've already made her favorite meatballs and mashed potatoes," Vanessa added. "And I picked a bunch of brightly colored September berries behind the house. I think Elizabeth is excited by their sharp autumn scent." Only Gabby, Elizabeth's father, had called the maid that once in a conversation in the study, and Amanda had picked up the nickname mentally, so shorter and much simpler ate, staring intently at her plate. She seemed to care the least, if at all, about Elizabeth's plight. "We'll have to keep an eye on this smashing person," Amanda decided to herself. "She's prepared my room perfectly, no complaints." But did she make any insinuations about her patient? In dealing with an autistic patient, all means are good, and all little things can be global. After these words, everyone at the table was again distracted by sweet cakes and compote. Amanda thought to herself, through her grief, dreams, and thoughts, "It's good. Here they have a soul." The servants dine at the same table with the master. Everyone is praying for the girl as best they can, all trying to brighten her life. Her thoughts were interrupted by Carl's voice. "Amanda, are you ready to see your patient?" The woman replied enthusiastically that she was looking forward to it, and she was not the least bit wrong. The curtains were drawn in Elizabeth's room. It was dark, and there was a kind of gloom and despair. Amanda immediately noted to herself that this had to change. It was understandable. A seriously ill person lived here, but it was not worth emphasizing it with decorations. The girl did not react to their appearance. At that moment, Vanessa brought a tray with Amanda's favorite dishes. The therapist decided not to put her work on hold. "Carl, Vanessa, let me feed Elizabeth, and we'll have a chat. Leave us alone." "Elizabeth is your new doctor, Amanda. She'll be with you almost nonstop. You don't mind if we leave you two alone, do you?" Again, there was no visible reaction. The girl obediently opened her mouth at the sight of food, chewing and swallowing like a puppet. But Amanda began her monologue. "I'm not a doctor or a carer for you, Elizabeth. I prefer the status of friend. I'll be there for you of my own free will, even though I'm an employee. I'll tell you the truth, I'd stay with you for free, as long as I like it very much. Your wonderful house, the place, the people, you. Tomorrow you and I are going to turn your room upside down. I don't think it will be bad for your health." For a split second, Amanda thought there was a flicker of something in the girl's eyes, some glimmer of reaction, but it all went out again very quickly, and it could have been the insidious play of light and shadow in the room at all. The doctor, under a shower, decided to think about it in her room later, but in the meantime she dressed her ward in warm clothes and took her in her pram to the courtyard to breathe the strong air of golden autumn. From that moment on, the days in the house followed a long-established pattern. In the morning, Amanda and Elizabeth had breakfast together in the girls' room. Then there were the inevitable drips and injections to combat the manifestations of genetic malfunctions. The obligatory 2-hour walk in the garden, where Ashley always lovingly tended the plants. Lunch in the great hall. At this meal, Amanda would spend time with the household and then feed Elizabeth. The patient's therapeutic sleep, a new batch of medication dripping steadily through the IV for a couple of hours at a time. Dinner, now in the presence of Carl, who on weekdays was always at work, and in the evenings and weekends worked hard at home in his office. Exhausted by the endless procedures, the patient fell into a deep sleep as early as 10 o'clock in the evening. Amanda studied the works of colleagues related to autism again and again. There were no changes in terms of closer contact with her ward, neither for the worse nor for the better. The girl's condition remained stable. Amanda talked to Elizabeth about everything, told her about the plot of her favorite fiction books, read her poems, showed her reproductions of paintings from a large colorful album. Or rather, the word talking is not appropriate here at all. The doctor conducted her eternal monologue, and the girl listened to it indifferently. The other day, already beginning to despair, a little doctor found in one of the foreign articles information that to level the manifestations of isolation with autism for patients can be a good help to communicate with the animal world. For some reason, there were no pets in Carl's house. After a general meeting of all the residents of the mansion, it was decided to get a puppy of a large dog. Most of all, for some reason, everyone liked a Canadian Newfoundland. 2 days later, Andrew brought a shaggy black treasure with stormy eyes from a kennel breeding this particular breed. He was irresistible. It is commonly believed that our lesser brothers have no intelligence. What told Tim then that the full name Timothy, and not some Bax or Lord, was so much nicer, that he was meant for Elizabeth. Finding himself in her room as a guest, the place had long since been on Amanda's errand, a more racy setting with lots of brightly colored elements. Tim headed straight for the girl and rubbed his wet nose into her palm. The doctor was sure there was a flicker of reaction in Elizabeth's eyes, lightning fast, but she had no doubt, bright and positive. For the first time, Amanda felt they were on the right track. By New Year's Eve and Christmas, everyone in the house was expecting Harry from Prague. Amanda didn't know the young man. She only remembered Vanessa's words. "He's golden." Elizabeth transforms when her big brother arrives. She can't smile, but here it's like her face lights up. Gabriella, who was present during their conversation, added, "And what a handsome man Harry is. Respectable, decent, wise, but at the same time outwardly a typical example of Hollywood hero lover. 2 characters in one person, it's so intriguing." Vanessa immediately echoed her words. "Oh, Gabriella, go change Elizabeth's bedclothes. While she and Amanda are out for a walk. You've got Cupid's days on your mind, you're not the right girl. Roll your lips." Gaby, wiggling her hips as usual, walked away, and the cook gave her a shrug and said to Amanda, "The girl goes completely off the rails when the owner's son flies home from Europe, making eyes at him, and he looks at her like she's nothing. He had a bride, but she cheated on her husband while he was earning money in the Czech Republic. They ran away, although the foolish young lady was begging us, shedding tears, just that the hair on her head did not tear in despair that she missed a rich party. It didn't help. Harry couldn't trust her at all, couldn't forgive her for seeing another man at the same time." Sighing sorrowfully, Vanessa suddenly suggested, "Come to my room tonight, and we'll have a tea party. I'll tell you my story, how Carl saved me from trouble, and why I've since nicknamed him the Angel of Goodness." On the walk, Amanda and Ashley discussed raising a new pet. It wasn't right for a pedigree dog to go pear-shucking in the yard. The gardener had told her he'd always wanted a dog. He patiently put up with Tim's antics, even forgave him for ramming a rose bush wrapped in cling film into the yard on the run. Amanda again thought that Elizabeth, sitting in the wheelchair, made some movement in the direction of the mischievous Newfoundlander, but she was in no hurry to express her assumptions aloud. We must watch and watch and watch again and again. There would be seen. After supper, when she was satisfied that Elizabeth had fallen into a restful sleep, she closed her door firmly and knocked on the next door. "Come in, I've been waiting. I've made us some green tea with molasses and gooseberry jam and nuts. Now we'll have a feast." Oksana had been in the chef's room only briefly before, but now she could examine the room in more detail. The same elegance and home coziness, spiced with personal things dear to her heart. There were many framed photographs on the wall, Carl and his wife still very young, Elizabeth in various angles, Ashley in the garden, then near the gazebo, then by the pool, a handsome young man on horseback. That's our Harry. A handsome man. Gabriella doesn't mince words. God grant him personal happiness. He's like his father in business. He should have children of his own, and he's still traveling abroad. I realize he's no monk, but all these windy girlfriends aren't what he needs for marriage. He'll make a marvelous father. He loves Elizabeth. Vanessa ate another spoonful of clear amber and emerald gooseberry jam and began her tale. After high school 35 years ago, I trained as a food technologist. Not just any culinary school in New York City. I dreamed of a career as a chef, the kind that would get me Michelin stars for the art of cooking. It didn't work out. The reason for everything was my uncluttered appearance. Height under 1 m, size 42 feet, fullness, bright copper hair, angular movements, lack of taste in the choice of wardrobe. Of course, chefs are not chosen by their clothes, but representatives of the personnel service in all the cafes and restaurants where I tried to get a job after graduation refused me under any plausible pretext. In one prestigious restaurant, only the lady in personnel was honest. Our customers often invite the chef of the dish to the room if they like it. You cannot be a business card of our institution. You're only fit for a place in the circus buffet. I don't say this harshly because I'm cynical, not at all. I like to be honest with the people I hire. It's better that way than looking away shamefacedly and keeping a kook in my pocket. And yet my traveling in agony was one day crowned with success. I was taken to a private cafe Tarina Tamara with authentic Georgian cuisine. The owner is a small, bald Georgian with hooked fingers and crooked legs. He then temporarily dispelled even the myth for me that Caucasian men are always endowed with a sharp oriental beauty. Curly-haired, black-eyed, daring, this man said without a word of criticism. I have a wife who is ill in a female way. She can't sleep with me, and I am a man. I need to save my physiology. You'll work in the kitchen and visit me a couple of times a week. If you do well, I'll make you head chef, and then maybe chief. I, from his words at first, and a precipitate fell out, said that I would think about it, and then I calculated in the Institute 6 years at the correspondence department. Before that, 2 years as an assistant cook in the canteen. I am not today, so tomorrow 26 years old will be. And I'm still wearing girls. There's no cue for my red-headed soul. No one even looked at me with that enveloping male gaze full of desire. Ever. Blushing and pale, 2 days later informed that I agreed to all the terms. The owner of Tarina Tamara glared at me, invited me to the back room. There I learnt the basics of love between crates of vegetables, herbs and boxes of vodka, which in decanters was later passed off as cha-cha. It's a shame. It's a shame. Come on. Big physiological love on a quick hand honestly lasted between me and the chief for 1.5 years, and then I got pregnant, having learnt the news. My lover was not ceremonious, dismissed in no time. He kept bemoaning that I shouldn't talk, that his wife shouldn't know anything. He has 3 grown-up children. They'll see who he's staring at. The family will laugh. He paid me 3 months' salary in advance and washed his paternal hands of me. About the fact that the baby should be born, I informed him not immediately. All the time delayed, I felt that this news will not turn out well. With my general fullness, belly became noticeable only in the 6th or 7th month. Just before the usual official maternity leave, I found myself on the street. My rent ran out 2 weeks before Ashley was born. All I had was an aunt in a remote village. I can't even tell you how close we are. I'd never seen my father before. My mother drank herself to death when I was 20. She was homeless at first, and then she went missing. But I never doubted for a second that the baby would be. I'm alone in this world, and this will be my own blood. The landlady of my flat is not a kind-hearted person, but she took pity, waited until I gave birth and discharged from the maternity hospital. She gave me a month to do everything, and then she put up with it for free. And then her children came to live with her. They had nowhere to live, so she showed me the door. We went with a 1-month-old baby to grieve. We stayed a week in a shabby hotel, but my son was restless. The noise insulation in the building was shitty. Other guests began to complain that we did not let them sleep at night. We moved out to nowhere. I'm sitting at the intercity bus stop with my stuff and Ashley's bundle. I thought I'd go to the countryside, see if I could find an abandoned house. I had enough money in my purse for a week's existence. When an expensive dark Jeep pulled up next to the bus stop, I didn't even immediately realize that the driver was asking me what I had. I sat there in tears. Carl, and it was him. At that time, the house in these parts built a house, looking for a local specialized shop that recently erected on the highway. I gave him the address, why not, but he didn't leave at once. Later he told me that my eyes were like those of a beaten dog, and there was so much desperation in them that he couldn't resist asking. "Woman, why are you sitting in the wind with a baby? I can give you a lift somewhere, even if it's in the other direction." I don't know how it happened, but I told him all my troubles in 2 words, as if I were in the wind. He chuckled and thought about it for a few minutes, then asked, "A professional cook, you say?" "I'm looking for such a specialist. I need to feed 2 teams of workers every day. We can provide you with a boxcar for accommodation." Of course, I didn't hesitate for a second. It was getting late, and the bus was delayed, so I was going to sleep in the field with Ashley, right on the dead grass. I gathered up my few belongings and climbed into the warmth of the car. There was no fear or apprehension. I was used to the work, and I loved my craft. Vanessa interrupted her long story and poured her and Amanda another cup of fragrant tea. She brought from the kitchen a dish of ruddy cakes left over from dinner and glanced briefly at Amanda. "Have I bored you with my tales yet, Doctor?" "Not at all, Vanessa. It's rare for anyone to talk to me so heartily to confide their secrets to me. I am very grateful to you for this frankness." "Then I will continue," said the woman. Then everything was much more pleasant. Guy's workers met me as a mother, starved on dry meat, and I with a move them borscht boiled on a brain bone, cooked cutlets, wheat porridge and a cast iron steamed with butter. When they brought to the table in compote, the foreman could not stand it. "You cook deliciously, Vanessa. We haven't seen such delicacies here for a long time. Therefore, guys, I will order the following. We have 15 people working here. It's hard to feed that many without a well-equipped kitchen. So we'll distribute the daily duty. Who of the men will help with wood for the stove, who will carry water, who will help the cook with other hard work. She's got a little boy in her arms. He needs to be fed and nursed. So have a conscience, brothers. Don't sit on this young woman's neck, and don't offend her in word or deed." That's how I found myself in our yard about 30 years ago, when it was still under construction. Ashley is my native gold, having grown up here. After the building was finished, I stayed in the house with the owners. Carl and his wife had Harry's little boy at the time. Oh, what a table I made for their housewarming party. The guests could only wonder where he'd found such a cook. There were various people in the house, high-ranking and with connections. Many times they tried to lure me to other houses. How could they do such a thing? An angel of goodness from heaven appeared to me one autumn evening at a bus stop, and I'd betray him when others beckoned. Elizabeth was born to me, her nannies and carers, and Carl made me head of the house and promoted me to housekeeper. Everyone here has become dear to me. Even that empty Gabriella with her dreams of hunting Carl's son doesn't seem like an enemy. That's my story for you, Amanda. Maybe it will help you in your work. Amanda went to her room pensive. She used to trust the notion that the rich were stingy with their souls. In Carl's house, she saw a different world, full of warmth, respect, and a willingness to help each other through the difficult realities of life. Her fervent conviction to do everything she could to make Elizabeth feel at least a little better became even stronger in her mind. From the next day, she increased the therapeutic load for the girl, insisted on the return of massage procedures, deciding that they were not harmful to the body, broken by the disease, and on the contrary, contribute to its tone. Elizabeth was still unresponsive to the change in regime. Only the appearance of Timothy's shaggy puppy seemed to revitalize her face a little. Amanda didn't give up. She wheeled her pram around the park and sat Elizabeth down to watch Ashley's dog. He took the assignment seriously. Little Tim already knew the commands: sit, down, place, come, walk. In the house, the Newfoundland recognized only 2 people as masters: Elizabeth, at whose feet he spent all his free time, and Ashley, who fed and brought him up. The days were running by, and the winter holidays, New Year's Eve and Christmas, everyone's favorite, were approaching. Amanda, Gaby, and Vanessa were happy to decorate the already pretty house with fir tree arrangements, colorful wreaths, and sculptures of fairy tale characters. Ashley installed artificial Christmas trees in all the rooms, richly decorated with expensive toys. Everyone was in a pre-holiday mood. 3 days before New Year's Eve, Amanda received an unexpected phone call from her only close friend. "Amanda, you're going to fall over. I have big news. I'm getting hastily married and moving to Florida with my lover. He's a military engineer. We're going to live near the Cape Canaveral spaceport." Amanda was instantly sad. With Olivia, they were like sisters almost, since the orphanage together always supported each other, and now they were going to be separated. Meanwhile, her friend continued to chatter into the phone. "On the 30th of December, I have a farewell bachelorette party in a nightclub. On the 2nd of January, we have a one-way flight. No cancellations. Amanda, I've prepared a present for you for the road. I've made an evening dress. It's amazing. It's not worthy of your beauty, but it'll set it off beautifully." If Olivia could see me now, she would die laughing, thought the nurse. Recently, she had overheard Gaby's remarks about her. The maid gave her a scornful look after dinner and summarized. "Our therapist is a moth-pale mouse gray. How only the earth bears such shapeless, faceless women. They're worthless, and men probably avoid such a scarecrow a mile away." Amanda promised Olivia to call back by nightfall and went to Elizabeth's room. The girl, after a hearty dinner, a walk before, was already fast asleep, sprawled out on the soft pillows. After adjusting the blanket, she slipped out into the corridor. The conversation with Carl was not going to be easy. At her timid knock on the door of the study, the owner responded at once. "Come in. I've just finished going through the evening's papers." "Is something the matter?" "I had an emergency." She outlined the situation in a nutshell, but I'll accept whatever you decide. "The fact is, someone close to me is going away for a long time. We won't get a chance to see each other if I can't make it to my friend's appointment. I'm not a warden in prison or a cousin in the zone to keep you locked up, Amanda. You've been in our house for a month and a half without leave." Elizabeth is doing well, if not brilliantly, without a hint of deterioration. "I am pleased with your initiatives, methods, and practical experiments. None of them have been detrimental to my sick daughter. Be sure to go to the city. I'll give you 24 hours. On the 31st of December, after 8 p.m., you must return to these walls." Amanda didn't leave his office. She flew out on wings. Vanessa was in the kitchen, and the released nurse couldn't help but share her news with her. "I'm ugly," Amanda said, "but everyone wants a bit of colorful holiday. And when I get to see my Olivia again." "You're ugly?" She smiled back at the cook. "Save the fairy tales for others, my dear. All your masquerades won't fool me, a clever old lady who has lived in this world. I've long guessed that you hide your beauty under a dull image, wearing glasses. Don't you worry, this secret stays between us. If you're doing this, you must have a good reason. Your profession doesn't get in the way of all this cross-dressing, and my business is my business." Amanda turned round at a run, rushed back into the kitchen and hugged the cookery master warmly and tenderly. "I know 2 angels of kindness in this house already. Vanessa, your kindness and willingness to understand and accept is in no way inferior to your host's graciousness." She gave Vanessa an embarrassed peck on her lush cheek, smelling of vanilla and apples, and rushed off to call Olivia to cheer her up with the news. Considering that Olivia worked as a fashion designer in one of the city's attires, the dress for Amanda turned out to be luxurious. Soft, tight silk of dark blue color emphasized every curve of the graceful figure, while not forgetting all the proper charms and roundness, the neckline, and the slit on the leg in the very point and measure. A string of pearls, a bracelet and earrings that her adoptive parents gave her on her 25th birthday, exactly in tone and in the general style of the outfit. As she dressed her friend in one of the changing booths in the atelier, Olivia froze with admiration. "Amanda, you are going to be a goddess this evening. And your fiancé, I'm sure he won't waver. He's already seen you in our shared photos. But the rest of the male sex will be at your feet, you'll see." "Oh, I'd rather stay away from all these signs of intrusive male attention." Amanda replied bitterly, "I've had enough sad experiences in this area. It seems to me that decent, if not knights, at least adequate gentlemen are no longer in this world. I have only come across representatives who managed to disappoint me for a long time. I'm going home to my flat to fix my hair and nails and stuff. I'll meet you at the club tonight." The place called Big City Lights met Amanda, who arrived by taxi with a stunningly colorful appearance. Dressed up fir trees and pine trees, colored lights and tinsel shining in their light, the crowd dressed to the hilt. Her favorite friend Olivia was wrong. There were many real beauties on the dance floor, at the tables, at the bar, worthy to become the prima donnas of this evening and the coming night. On the eve of the new year, it seemed that everyone tried not to hit in the dirt face. The audience was already relaxed by the fountain of hot drinks. Amanda breathed a sigh of relief. No one around her cared about her, but she was glad too soon. At one of the tables, Mason was having a good time with his friends, her first and only man. At the sight of Amanda relaxed and chatting serenely with Olivia and the rest of the girls, a greedy gleam lit up in the man's eyes. And that girl just got even more beautiful. I shouldn't have let that bird out of the love cage back then. Such a friend next to me will make the image of any successful man, he thought to himself, lewdly grinning. Today again I will get her into bed. Deciding to give his victim at least one drink to make her more agreeable, Mason returned to his company, but kept Amanda in his sights. After about an hour, Mason ran out of patience. He decided to go and teach the wayward babe a lesson by humiliating her in front of her friends. Amanda suddenly appeared behind him with a banal greeting. "I see what people are like without a bodyguard. Do you want me to protect your gorgeous body from the claims of other men?" Amanda jerked away from Mason in surprise. But she didn't want to spoil Olivia's wonderful evening, so she quickly got up from the table and led Mason away from the bar. "What do you want? You and I dotted all the I's and T's a long time ago. Go back to whoever you're spending the night with and leave me alone." But it wasn't so easy to stop the smarmy bastard. He wasn't about to give up his intentions to sleep with such a lovely woman again. "Come on, Amanda. Let's have a nice glass of red wine to this chance encounter and part as friends. I didn't mean to piss you off. I just thought you might have something to remember from the pages of our brief affair." The woman prudently decided not to make a scandal because of casual circumstances and obediently followed the man. At the counter, Mason ordered 2 glasses of some expensive grape wine and from an overseas collection, generously bought a chocolate bar and nuts sprinkled with sugar. He put his arm round Amanda's waist. The man's calculation was trivial, that now his old acquaintance would get drunk and become more docile, but he was wrong. Amanda drained her wine glass without even tasting it and looked boldly into her ex-lover's eyes. "Am I free of you now? Is the ritual honored?" Mason was not accustomed to such behavior of ladies. He had never been refused, so he began to whisper in her ear. "This is not the end of our New Year's Eve date, my dear. Don't get your hopes up. I'm going to rent a private office, and you're going to be gentle with me. I remember everything, my lovely." Here we go again, Amanda thought with annoyance. Why is it that when a man is around, all his desires are always reduced to one thing? She looked around helplessly. There was no one around except a young man calmly sipping whiskey at the counter. And their eyes met. And what did the stranger read? But he slid valiantly off the bar stool and approached them. "This woman is here with me. I only stepped away from the table for a short while, and you, young man, immediately took advantage of my absence." Mason's eyes widened in surprise. "What kind of businessman are you? Where did you come from?" Amanda remembered the rest of it, as if in a nightmare. The man who'd come to her rescue had lifted Mason off the floor like a feather and given him a solid slap on the wrist. But the bitchy, temper tantrum-hardened man didn't calm down. Before retreating from the battlefield, he grabbed his unfinished glass of red wine and splashed the brightly colored liquid directly onto Amanda's dress. A huge maroon stain instantly spread across the silk. The woman turned pale, and her unexpected knight grabbed her by the arm and dragged her to the bathroom. On the way, he said something about washing the cloth quickly. Then there would be no trace left. Amanda was worried about something else entirely. No one had ever stood up for her before in her life. Suddenly, on some impulse, she threw her arms around the man's neck and dragged him with her to the club's exit, stopping only for a moment at the cloakroom to retrieve his coat. "I've got a car. I have an appointment here with an old friend, but he's running late." But Amanda didn't listen to him. As in a dream, she dragged the newly disembarked passengers along the cold autumn street to the car with checkers. She didn't care about propriety, about her ruined outfit, about the surprise of her companion who followed her obediently. There was only one single thought in her head. How good it is that I like to wear expensive silk linen. It won't be embarrassing. In her flat, where she had brought a random knight from the club. She pounced on the man like a tigress, like a ravenous march cat. and he didn't fight back. Everything that happened between them was like being in the Garden of Eden. The body sang, the soul rejoiced, the thoughts danced the can-can. How tired I am of being well-mannered and decent. Let it all be a one-time thing. I don't even know his name, though my casual lover is obviously handsome and not stupid. Of the latter, she was somehow sure, though they hadn't said a word to each other. In the morning, they fell asleep together without breaking their embrace, but Amanda woke up alone. Apart from the crumpled bed and a pillow that still smelled of a man's perfume, there was nothing in her flat that reminded her of the night before. She brewed coffee, pulled out her shoebox stash to buy Christmas presents for everyone in Carl's house. She was beginning to think of all these people as family. And the night, what could she do about it? That it had come to an end. All New Year's Eve magic comes to an end at some point. Gone was Father Christmas, having rid her of the vile mason. It's just a pity she didn't even feed the stranger breakfast, though the fridge is empty, and there's no bread, not even a slice. But she can make delicious pancakes. Okay, flour, sugar, vanilla, milk. There's a block of frozen butter in the freezer. But dream away. She needs to get back to her chores. Amanda went back to her fancy dress of a simpleton fool, packed her bag, and rang Andrew. Carl's driver had promised to take her shopping for presents and get her back to the manor by the appointed time. Amanda suddenly thought that the man she had spent this magical night with was also an angel of goodness and protection, at least for her personally. Her mood was twofold: sadness at the separation and something unfulfilled, and joy that such fireworks had happened in her rather bland life. At Carl's house, she and Andrew were there at 8 p.m. sharp, like clockwork. On the doorstep, Amanda was held up by Ashley and Tim. The gardener, embarrassed, handed her a bouquet made of spruce paws with pine cones and boughs of glittery sprinkles. Gabriella appeared on the porch, painted today, apparently in honor of New Year's Eve, in all the colors of the rainbow. Colored mascara, eyeliner, shadow, blush, lipstick. Strangely, with the maid's naturally good looks, it didn't even spoil her. Why, Ashley, you've been flaunting your attentions all over the place, and you said you loved me to the grave. Are your feelings, she misspelled the word, faded already? Have you switched to our doctor? The modest, quiet, ordinary gardener suddenly decided to fight back. I haven't had time to give you my simple gift yet, but don't touch Amanda. Don't you dare even speak to her in a disrespectful manner. You're not worth a fingernail. Gabriella gave Ashley a scornful glance and sang back. Shut up already, you gardening scarecrow. You're not the one I'm waiting here for. Harry should be here soon. The man's no match for you. Learn from him what a man with a capital letter looks and acts like. Amanda took Ashley's arm and led her away from him to interrupt the unpleasant monologue. You don't listen to her filthy words, Ashley. A man who can love plants and animals so well, it's like he's an extension of them on this earth. Some of us become an angel of kindness to others, heals and saves lost unhappy souls. And someone becomes a kind of shepherd, guide, conductor for flora and fauna, protects it from human cruelty, uses people for good, not spoiling, sparing, wisely. You are one of such angels of goodness for Mother Nature. Be proud of such an exceptional status. You have earned it. Amanda pecked the confused Ashley on the cheek and walked up the stairs. In the distance, she heard the sound of a car approaching the house, but she was already running to her ward. It was New Year's Eve, and Elizabeth wasn't ready. Vanessa had her hands full with the table. Everything was sparkling and glittering in the decorated hall. The table was bursting with food and drink, and all the family was dressed up. Even Amanda had changed her shapeless jumper for a white blouse with lace and a black skirt. The only things left in place were the wispy curl on her head and the funny glasses on the bridge of her nose. Carl came to the table in a soft cashmere pullover and loose light-colored trousers. Vanessa had little gold tinsel bows on her head and in her apron. Gabriella wore a provocative purple dress with a low neckline and a deep cutout on the back. It was the way the dishes were served to the table. In her chair sat a rather plain Elizabeth, wearing a delicate violet-colored dress. Amanda had done her hair. The girl looked refreshed. At her feet, as usual, lay the faithful guard Timothy. Ashley had specially washed him with dog shampoo for the holiday. His coat was shiny and even silvery in places. Amanda had already handed out presents to everyone, little Christmas decorations depicting angels in various outfits. All of them, if you shook them a little, made a melodious chime. We started to sit down at the table at 22 in the evening. We had to see off the old year, thank it for all the good things, and ask it to take the bad things with it. Carl went out to hurry his son, and soon they were in the hall together. Amanda was just taking a sip of orange juice when the man she had spent tonight with appeared in front of Elizabeth and her. She even caught the end of the sentence. "I'm sorry, Father, I was late. There were unforeseen circumstances. And then I also had to reschedule an important business meeting that had canceled yesterday." Amanda choked up and blinked her eyes, frightened. And then a miracle happened in front of everyone. There was no other word for it. Elizabeth became animated, reached out to her brother, and then made a gesture towards the floor and inarticulately said, "My youth." Everyone was stunned, rushed to brace and hugged the girl. Amanda slipped quietly from the table in the midst of the commotion. Let her relatives stay together. Without her, no one would notice her absence. And she needed to recover from the unexpected shock of discovery. The man of her dreams, her mysterious night visitor, and Carl's son were one and the same person. She was shaking all over with confusion. At the table, it was soon discovered that Elizabeth's carer and her doctor, who had brought such a joyous event to the house, had gone somewhere. Harry was sent in search of her, and he knocked insistently on the door of the house physician, then opened it a little, but found nothing in the room but the sound of water running in the bath. Deciding that the woman might have been taken ill, the man pushed the bathroom door resolutely open. Above the bathtub, bent over, Amanda was furiously rubbing some kind of cloth, dropping tears into the water. She turned round at the noise of the door opening. She wasn't wearing her ugly glasses now. Her hair was loose down her back, and Harry caught a glimpse of something very familiar about her. Then he moved his eyes to the bathtub where a beautiful dark blue silk dress lay. The puzzle came together. You? Harry shrieked in surprise, and I came back with champagne, provisions, a bouquet of flowers to your flat, but it was empty. I almost went mad with despair. I thought I'd lost my night fairy forever. Amanda boldly stepped into his open arms. To hell with all principles, decency, rules. This man had turned her soul upside down yesterday. People on this earth meet and get to know each other in different ways. She feels good with him. The rest doesn't matter. Harry let the girl out first. Quickly put something on. It's only 5 minutes until the chimes strike. We'll make it in time. There was no time for the usual masquerade. Amanda's blouse and skirt were all wet. She pulled on her tight jeans and white jumper in a matter of seconds. Didn't bother to brush her hair. They arrived at the table as the chimes struck. Champagne bubbles were playing in the glasses. Vanessa's culinary creations were waiting on the table. Even Elizabeth tried to put a semblance of a smile on her face. Carl did not ask his son a single question, only glanced at the young people seated at the table next to him. Vanessa thought to herself, and with that, we'll soon have children's voices in our house again. Ashley smiled happily, stroking Tim's back. Gabriella was biting her lip nervously and chewing on a red fish sandwich. So I'll have Ashley stolen from me soon enough if I'm catching crows. Now I'll have to accept the gardener's advances if I'm to stay in this house and get more of a foothold. He's not a bad chap, he's kind and handy, and quite handsome. The New Year's Eve night was truly fairy tale and magical, just as it should have been. Everyone at the table was happy in his own way. The long-awaited winter holidays flew by in the midst of entertainment and rest. Only Amanda worked tirelessly with Elizabeth to consolidate her success. On his first day at work, Carl realized that he had relaxed too much over the weekend and decided to be home early. Quietly stepping on the soft carpeted walkway, he walked to the door of his daughter's room and witnessed Elizabeth's new victories. Nuff, Tima, Daddy, Harry, Vanessa, Ashley, Amanda, Gaby. Elizabeth dutifully repeated the syllables after Amanda. Carl rounded the corner of the corridor and cried. A panel appointed by Amanda's teacher 10 days later gave a reassuring summary the disease had subsided. The process of cell and tissue destruction had slowed down. The remission period had already exceeded all known scientific limits. Carl, I told you Amanda is an excellent specialist. In our case, expecting a full recovery is a bit of a stretch. But your daughter has shown marked improvement in her general condition. She's starting to react to the outside world. Weakly, not much, but she's starting to talk again. You know, I was thinking, if the patient lives surrounded by angels of goodness, as my student characterized it to me, he has every chance to stay on this earth for some more time. and you will make him as happy as possible for her. I am sure of it. 6 months have passed. The plane leaving on the morning flight to Prague was delayed due to weather conditions. The cute young couple kept glancing at the electronic board and at each other. "Harry, what if I hadn't gone to that ill-fated nightclub then? You would have seen me in the image of a monster and would not pay attention to me," asked the mum-to-be, with a rather noticeable rounded tummy. "Come on." The man answered her, adjusting his wedding ring on his finger. "I would have seen you through all your disguises. Your angelic soul, your ability to do good cannot be hidden. I'd fall for such radiant magic." The iron, monotonous voice of the announcer announced the boarding of their flight. The couple hugged each other and slowly walked towards the boarding point. "We will finish all my business in Prague now. You will see this beautiful city and we will hurry to our home. Elizabeth, do you know what she gave me before we left?" "Harry, Amanda, Elizabeth, Tim is waiting." "It's a puzzle. We can't let them all down. Without us, the circle of good angels would be incomplete."